Hello everyone, I'm Crime Whisper. I know many of you like to listen to these stories as you fall asleep. So before you drift off tonight, leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from, and if you enjoy these true crime stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe now. Let's get comfortable, relax, and dive into tonight's case story. It was a calm Monday morning in autumn. In Sydney, Australia, a man named Leland Stevens was out boating with a close friend, heading from Sydney Harbour toward Colonel Bay around 7:30 a.m., just as the boat neared the shore. Leland noticed something odd drifting on the water. A long blue tarp floating quietly on the surface. It looked so unusual that he couldn't ignore it out of curiosity. He steered the boat closer as he approached. He realized the tarp was tightly wrapped with white rope, clearly enclosing something inside. Then, at the very bottom, he saw them, a pair of white sneakers poking out in that chilling moment. Leland understood what he was looking at. He immediately called the police, snapped a few photos of the scene, and waited anxiously for help to arrive. When officers got there and carefully untied the tarp, they discovered the body of a young man inside. The victim was neatly dressed, a black JHA brand shirt, CK jeans, a plastic glove on his right hand, and white sneakers on his feet. The autopsy later revealed that the young man had died from 2 gunshot wounds to the right side of his chest. Investigators identified him through distinctive tattoos on his back. The victim was Jaime Gao, a 20-year-old student who had been missing for a week. The murder shocked the quiet seaside town of Colonel, known for its pristine beaches and peaceful atmosphere. No one could have imagined that such a horrific discovery would unfold there. Jaime Gao was a business student at the University of Technology, Sydney. He lived in Hurstville, an area often called Little Hong Kong, a bustling suburb filled with Chinese restaurants, supermarkets, and the sounds of Cantonese in the air by all appearances. Jaime led a normal, promising life. He was smart, well-dressed, sociable, and even had a Japanese girlfriend. But behind that clean-cut image, he was hiding a dark double life. Police had been monitoring Jaime since 2011, when he was only 17, for his suspected involvement in drug trafficking. Over the years, he used his student status as the perfect cover, allowing him to operate quietly within the Sun Yi-on crime syndicate, a notorious Hong Kong-based triad. By 2014, Jaime had become a key member of the organization's Sydney branch. In the weeks leading up to his death, friends recalled him talking excitedly about a big deal, one that could make him a fortune. That deal was set for Tuesday, May 20th, 2014. That afternoon, Jaime drove his white sedan to the Padstow area in South Sydney, accompanied by 2 friends from Hong Kong. Before leaving the car, he took nothing but a single bag, leaving behind his phone, wallet, and personal belongings. Surveillance cameras later showed him walking toward another vehicle waiting nearby. His 2 friends stayed behind, expecting him to return soon, but as time passed, their concern grew. Minutes turned into hours, and Jaime never came back. Worried, they began circling the area, searching for any sign of him. After Jaime Gao stepped into that white sedan, no one ever saw him alive again. His 2 friends, who had been waiting nearby, drove around multiple times, hoping to spot him somewhere, but it was useless. Jaime had vanished without a trace. As their unease grew, they realized something was terribly wrong. Finally, with no other option, they parked Jaime's white sedan by the roadside and sent distress messages to his relatives and friends. One of the first to respond was Henry, Jaime's close friend since high school. Henry knew Jaime well. He wasn't the kind of person to disappear or abandon his friends. When Henry got the message at 3 p.m., he immediately sensed danger. He quickly gathered a few of their mutual friends, and together, they rushed to Padstow to look for Jaime. The white sedan was still there. When they opened the car door, they found Jaime's phone, passport, and university documents all untouched inside. But one detail immediately stood out. The phone had clearly been tampered with. Many photos and videos had been deleted. as if someone had deliberately tried to erase evidence. The group searched everywhere, expanding their search radius, combing nearby streets, but there was no trace of Jaime by the next morning, May 21st. All hope of him returning had faded. They finally went to the police to report him. Missing Henry provided crucial information. He told investigators that just one day before disappearing, Jaime had dinner with him at a Vietnamese restaurant in Hurstville. During that meal, Jaime had been unusually excited. He mentioned a major deal scheduled for the next day. The meeting, he said, would take place at the Hurstville Meridian Hotel, and the supposed buyer was a detective from the Sydney Police Department. Oddly, Jaime never revealed the officer's name for police. Jaime was no stranger. They had been watching him for years, though he appeared to be a polite, well-mannered student. He was actually a drug trafficker working with an international criminal network, but proving his crimes had always been difficult. Investigators soon uncovered that just months earlier, on January 9, 2014, Jaime had been secretly questioned by the Australian Crime Commission (ACC) about a kidnapping case. It stemmed from a complicated breakup involving a friend of Jaime's. When that plan went wrong, a young man named Yu, completely uninvolved, ended up being kidnapped and beaten before being released. That incident had already placed Jaime on law enforcement's radar long before he disappeared. Returning to the current case, police obtained security footage from around Pads, and the results were startling. The cameras clearly showed Jaime's final movements on that fateful afternoon after getting out of his own car. He walked straight toward a white sedan parked nearby and climbed into the back seat. A few minutes later, that car drove off toward a nearby self-storage facility called Rent-A-Space at around 1:42 p.m. Cameras recorded the driver stepping out. He wore a hoodie and a cap, concealing his face, but detectives immediately noticed something familiar about his build and movements. Then, reviewing older footage, police made a key breakthrough on May 19th. The night before Jaime vanished, surveillance cameras at the Meridian Hotel captured him sitting across from that same man when police enhanced the video. They were stunned. The man was Glenn McNamara, a former Sydney detective. McNamara had left the force years earlier to become a private investigator and crime author. Writing a book called Dirty Work, he had also appeared on television, building a reputation as a crime expert. But behind that facade of success, McNamara's personal life was collapsing. He was broke, entangled in a bitter divorce, and drowning in legal fees. His $3,850 book had sold poorly, leaving him in deep financial distress. In desperation, he had decided to take a dangerous baton. Interesting detail emerged. Both McNamara and Jaime had worked for the same law firm. Jaime had occasionally helped as a Cantonese English interpreter, which may have been how they first met back at the storage facility. Cameras recorded McNamara entering his passcode to open the gate. Driving toward Unit 803, he parked, got out, and opened the door for Jaime. Jaime quickly stepped inside, trying to avoid being seen by the nearby cameras, a sign that this meeting was not meant to be public only. Minutes later, at 1:45 p.m., another car appeared, a silver sedan. The driver circled the area cautiously, scanning for anyone nearby before stopping directly across from Unit 803. An older man, wearing a hat and walking with a noticeable limp, stepped out of the car, calm and deliberate. He walked up to the unit and knocked on the door, which clear this wasn't a chance encounter. This was a meeting that had been planned in advance. A few minutes after entering the storage unit, the elderly man stepped back out. His gait was unsteady, and he returned to his silver sedan with slow, deliberate steps. But what happened next was strange. He reversed his car, positioning the trunk so that it lined up perfectly with the back of McNamara's white sedan. Moments later, Glenn McNamara emerged from the unit, but now he looked completely different. He had changed his clothes. He went to his car and pulled out a surfboard bag. At first, it seemed light and easy for him to carry, but when McNamara returned to the unit and came out the second time, the bag was bulky and heavy. So heavy in fact, that he had to struggle to move it. The two men then lifted the bag together and placed it in McNamara's trunk. Their movements were calm and deliberate, as if every step had been rehearsed when the job was done. The silver sedan drove off first, followed closely by McNamara. From that moment on, Jaime Gall was never seen alive again. Given the later autopsy results, 2 bullet wounds to the chest, investigators concluded that Jaime was murdered inside that storage unit, and his body was stuffed into the surfboard bag. The surveillance footage proved to be the key witness. It traced McNamara's every move. After he left the facility, he drove straight to his apartment complex. Arriving at 3:03 p.m., cameras there caught his car clearly. License plate VV67P. When police checked the registration, they discovered it had been purchased under a false name just weeks before the murder, for $2,200 odd. The premeditation was undeniable. The first part of the plan, killing Jaime, was complete now. They had to make him disappear. An hour later, at 4:20 p.m., McNamara and the limping man were seen at a Bunnings warehouse in Caringbah. The two appeared surprisingly relaxed, chatting casually like any two men shopping for the weekend on the store's CCTV. They purchased a coil of rope and rented a pulley system, items that would be used in the next horrifying step of their plan after leaving the store. They drove down to an underground parking garage where McNamara's small boat was parked there. They loaded the heavy surfboard bag containing Jaime's body onto the boat. When the grim task was done, McNamara bought 2 6-packs of beer, and the men drank together, celebrating what they believed was the successful completion of their crime. 2 men sharing beers after a murder. The image was as disturbing as it was unforgettable, but police didn't have to wonder long about the identity of that mysterious, limping man the moment they reviewed the footage. They immediately recognized him. It was Roger Rogerson, a name etched into the dark history of Australian law enforcement. To understand how Rogerson became entangled in this case, we have to look back at his infamous life story, one that reads more like a crime novel than a biography. Rogerson was born on January 3, 1941, in Bondi, Sydney. When he was 6, his family moved to Bedtime, a working-class suburb. His father was a boilermaker, his mother a homemaker, and by all accounts, theirs was a simple, modest life from an early age. Roger stood out. He was intelligent, disciplined, and excelled academically, but more than anything, he dreamed of becoming a police officer. His parents opposed the idea. His mother wanted him to become an engineer, and his father despised the police, believing the job was dangerous and poorly paid. But Roger was determined. In January 1958, at just 17 years old, he joined the New South Wales Police Academy. 2 years later, he officially became a police officer, assigned to the Paxton Police Station, a tough neighborhood filled with immigrants, poverty, and crime. The young officer quickly earned a reputation for being fearless and street smart. He knew the area intimately, who the gang leaders were, where the drugs came from, and how to get information out of people. His talent for gathering intelligence made him invaluable to senior detectives, and within a few short years, Roger was promoted to detective. Over the next 2 decades, Rogerson became a household name. He solved major crimes, appeared in newspapers, and was hailed as one of Sydney's toughest, most effective detectives. Many saw him as a future police commissioner, but behind that badge of honor, Rogerson was running a criminal empire of his own. He used his authority to control gangs, take bribes, and eliminate rivals. Those who stood in his way often didn't live long. In 1981, Rogerson shot and killed drug dealer Warren Lanfranchi in broad daylight, stole $10,000 from his body, and claimed it was self-defense despite public outrage. He was acquitted due to lack of evidence. After the shooting, Lanfranchi's girlfriend, Sally Ann, went to the media, saying, "I've been paying police for 10 years. It sounds unbelievable, but it's real, and it's happening." Her courage made her a target. In 1986, Sally Ann Huckstep was found dead in a pond, strangled before being dumped in the water. Police believed her murder was a warning to anyone who dared expose Rogerson. By then, Rogerson's name had become synonymous with corruption, violence, and betrayal. A man once trusted to uphold the law, now using it as a weapon, had wiped away every trace they could, and continued living as if nothing had happened. But Roger's illusion of control was about to crumble. On April 11, 1986, he was officially dismissed from the police force, stripped of his badge, but not his arrogance. Roger reinvented himself almost overnight. He gave media interviews, hosted talk shows, wrote columns for the Daily Mail in 2006, commented on the TV series Underbelly in 2008, and even published a book, The Dark Side. In 2009, the ventures brought him fame and money, but that money never stayed for long. Constant lawsuits and legal battles drained his income, leaving him financially unstable still. Roger was adaptable. Every setback was an opportunity in disguise, and his motivation was the same as it had always been: greed. It was this insatiable hunger for wealth that ultimately pulled him into the murder of Jaime Gao in 2014, the morning after the killing, at 7:32 a.m. Security footage captured two men entering the elevator of McNamara's apartment building. They appeared calm, dressed casually, carrying fishing rods, as if heading out for a peaceful morning by the sea. But these weren't fishermen. They were McNamara and Roger, and in the small boat attached to their car lay the lifeless body of Jaime Gao, wrapped tightly in a blue tarp. By 11:03 a.m., after a 3.5-hour trip, the men returned to the harbor. The tarp was gone. Jaime's body had been dumped into the ocean. Their mission was complete. What came next was cleanup. McNamara drove Roger back to storage unit number 803, where they began scrubbing away the final traces of their crime. Despite being 72 and limping heavily, Roger moved with precision, carrying a blue bucket and pouring liquid down the drain, likely washing away blood or residue. Meanwhile, McNamara returned the pulley system to Bunnings' warehouse in Caringbah, as if it had just been another day of work that night. The two even celebrated with friends at a bar, laughing, drinking, and showing not a hint of remorse to them. Murder was just another job. 4 days later, on May 23rd, Jaime Gao was still missing. McNamara went about his life as if nothing had happened, parking his white sedan in its usual spot, checking his mail, and heading upstairs to sleep. But he didn't know that the police had been watching his every move. They had gathered enough evidence and were just waiting for the right moment. That moment came after midnight at 1:25 a.m. Officers executed a search warrant at the rent-a-space storage facility on Davies Road, Padstow, inside storage unit number 803. Investigators found old furniture, boxers, and traces that told a horrifying story. Forensic experts concluded that Jaime had likely been sitting on a chair when he was shot, execution style. After carefully collecting evidence, police moved to their next target at 4:30 a.m. They arrived at McNamara's apartment complex and quietly towed his white sedan away for inspection inside. They made a breakthrough discovery, found an object under the driver's seat, looks to be wrapped carefully. An officer reported inside the vehicle. Investigators uncovered a brown bag beneath the driver's seat and a blue backpack hidden under the rear seat. Inside those bags were 3 packages of drugs weighing about 28 kilograms, with a wholesale value of roughly $700,000 Australian dollars on the street. Those same drugs could have fetched close to $3 million. That discovery cracked the case wide open. It revealed the real motive behind the murder, not just a killing, but a calculated robbery for profit. When McNamara woke up that morning and went to check his car, he was stunned to find it missing. The fact that he had left nearly $1 million worth of drugs in his vehicle for days showed how reckless or overconfident he had become. Realizing the situation was collapsing fast, he called Roger in a panic. Roger at that moment was at Sydney Airport, not fleeing, but preparing to fly to Brisbane for a charity event. The two met briefly at the airport. Tension thick in the air. As they scrambled to figure out what to do, Roger decided to proceed with his trip to avoid suspicion, leaving McNamara to deal with the fallout. But the net was already closing that evening. At precisely 6:20 p.m., Sydney police arrested McNamara at the airport 1 hour later. At 7:27 p.m., a large police task force moved in, and the dark secret of two former detectives began to unravel for the entire world to see. At 7:27 p.m., police surrounded Roger Rogerson's home. The once respected former detective opened his door to a sight he had seen countless times before: flashing blue lights, armed officers, and a warrant with his name on it. But this time, he wasn't the one in control. He was the one in handcuffs inside the home. Investigators seized phones, computers, documents, and personal notebooks, searching for any link between Roger and the murder. The evidence, however, was already overwhelming: surveillance footage, forensic traces, and phone records tied both men directly to Jaime Gao's disappearance and death when questioned. Roger tried to maintain his trademark composure. He told police he had met Jaime for a business deal, claiming he had no idea what happened to the young man afterward. His story, however, began to crumble the moment detectives confronted him with the timeline, the elevator footage, the security cameras at the storage unit, the blue tarp on the boat, and the discovery of Jaime's body floating near Cronulla. Each detail painted a damning picture. Meanwhile, McNamara, facing mounting pressure and knowing the evidence against him was ironclad, started to talk in an attempt to minimize his role. He claimed the situation had gotten out of hand. According to him, the plan was originally just to scare Jaime and take the drugs, but when Roger pulled the trigger, everything changed. Whether true or not, his version of events did little to lessen his guilt. Both men were implicated in premeditated murder. The trial that followed in 2016 was one of the most closely watched in Australian legal history. The courtroom was packed: journalists, former colleagues, and curious citizens, all eager to witness the downfall of two men who once represented law and order. The prosecution laid out the sequence with chilling precision. Jaime Gao was lured to the storage unit under the pretense of a drug deal. Roger and McNamara planned to steal the drugs, eliminate Jaime, and dispose of the body. The evidence, from the CCTV recordings to the drug packages found in McNamara's car, tied the entire operation together. During the proceedings, Roger tried to portray himself as a mentor who had been manipulated by McNamara, while McNamara claimed he was under Roger's psychological control. But the jury wasn't swayed. The evidence was too detailed. The intent to clearing. June 2016, both Roger Rogerson and Glenn McNamara were found guilty of the murder of Jaime Gao. The courtroom fell silent as the verdict was read. These were two men who had once worn badges, sworn to protect the public, now condemned as killers driven by greed. The judge described their actions as cold-blooded, calculated, and deeply disturbing. He emphasized that their crime was aggravated not only by its brutality, but also by the betrayal of their sworn duty as former law enforcement officers. Roger Rogerson was sentenced to life in prison without parole. McNamara received the same as the two were led away in handcuffs. Roger turned briefly toward the gallery. The once feared detective who had lived a life of corruption, power, and manipulation now faced the ultimate punishment: the loss of his freedom and legacy. Jaime Gao's family, though shattered by grief, finally found a measure of closure. Their son's life had been taken for greed, but justice had prevailed in the end. The story of Roger Rogerson and Glenn McNamara became a haunting symbol of moral decay, a reminder that even those sworn to uphold the law can become consumed by their own darkness. And that night, as the ocean waves rolled quietly against the shores of Colonel Bay, the same waters that once carried Jaime Gao's body seemed to whisper the same truth: no secret stays buried forever. Police were already stationed at Roger Rogerson's private residence in Sydney when the next dramatic turn of the case unfolded. in a scene unlike anything Australia had witnessed before. Authorities held a press conference right outside Roger's house, with his stunned wife watching from the doorstep. Currently inside the residence is Mrs. Rogerson, a police spokesperson announced. To the gathered media, Mr. Rogerson himself is not home. He's believed to be in Brisbane and is expected to return on Tuesday. As detectives combed through the house, they uncovered a crucial piece of evidence, a pair of black trousers strikingly similar to the ones Roger had been wearing on the day of the murder. Forensic testing later confirmed the police's suspicions. Traces of gunpowder residue were present on the fabric, directly linking him to the shooting that ended Jaime Gao's life after more than an hour of careful searching. Officers made another chilling discovery. Around 9 p.m., a small blue plastic bucket in Roger's garage. It was the same one seen in the storage unit's surveillance footage. The same bucket used to clean the crime scene. This single object tied Rogerson physically and unmistakably to the aftermath of the killing by the next morning, May 26, 2014. Two Sydney detectives boarded a flight to Brisbane to arrest Roger, but fate had its own timing that very morning. Police patrolling the waters off Colonel spotted something drifting near the surface. A blue tarp inside was Jaime Gao's body, exactly where investigators had theorized it would be. Roger, oblivious to the discovery, had already left Brisbane. Driving back towards Sydney, he had no idea he was heading straight into the center of a media storm on May 27th. As he arrived home, the street was swarming with reporters and cameras. Microphones were shoved in his face as journalists shouted questions. "Mr. Rogerson, do you maintain your innocence?" Roger, with his trademark smirk, muttered, "Sorry, boys," and brushed past them into his home with both Rogerson and McNamara now in custody. Police began separate interrogations, and what followed was as darkly ironic as it was disturbing just days earlier. The two had been celebrating their success over beers now. They were desperate to save themselves, each betraying the other in a battle to shift blame. Roger told investigators that McNamara had called him in panic that day, begging for help. When he arrived at the storage unit, he claimed Jaime was already dead, according to Roger. He merely assisted after the fact, having walked into a disaster not of his making. McNamara, however, painted a completely different picture. He testified that Jaime was alive and sitting on a chair negotiating a drug deal when Roger burst into the unit without saying a word. Roger allegedly drew his gun and fired 2 quick shots, killing Jaime instantly. McNamara claimed he froze in terror and that Rogerson then turned the gun on him, threatening to kill him next if he didn't help dispose of the body out of fear for his life. He said he obeyed every instruction even when his daughter Jessica visited him in prison. McNamara maintained his innocence, insisting he had been forced into it, but detectives already had a silent witness that didn't lie. The CCTV footage through careful analysis. Investigators discovered that McNamara had met Jaime more than 20 times before the murder. These weren't chance meetings, they were deliberate steps in a meticulously planned setup. McNamara's past as a respected detective made him the perfect lure. Jaime, usually cautious around police, saw him as a trustworthy client, even a friend in Jaime's eyes. This was his golden opportunity, the deal of a lifetime that would make him rich in reality. It was a trap. Cameras revealed that on May 19th, one day before the murder, McNamara had towed his small boat from the harbor to his apartment's parking garage, preparing the vessel that would later carry Jaime's body out to sea. The next morning, May 20th, at around 11 a.m., McNamara was seen using a public payphone to contact Jaime. It was a clever move. Calling from a public booth instead of his mobile ensured there would be no digital trail leading back to him from that phone. He told Jaime to meet him in Padstow. In 2 hours, everything unfolded exactly as planned. At 1 p.m., Jaime and 2 of his friends arrived at the location, unaware that in a silver sedan parked nearby, Roger Rogerson was waiting, ready to play his part when Jaime stepped out to meet McNamara. Roger quietly drove away, avoiding security cameras minutes later. All 3 men entered storage unit 803, but only 2 walked out alive sometimes. Even the smallest tensions in everyday life can conceal unimaginable horrors. When resentment festers quietly, it can erupt into unthinkable violence. This was the case in Singapore, where a hard-working Vietnamese woman fell victim to a shocking act of hatred on the morning of December 10th, 2024. The Nippon Paint Store at Block 210, Hougang Street 21 opened as usual inside. Ms. Dao T, a Vietnamese migrant worker who had spent several years in Singapore, began her shift. Alongside her was the 26-year-old store manager, a trusted colleague and friend. The day started like any other, calm, routine, and ordinary, but at exactly 11 a.m., that normalcy was shattered. Terrified screams ripped through the store, freezing everyone in shock. Customers, nearby shop owners, and pedestrians alike. The manager was confronted with a nightmare. Du Xia Ying, a former employee of the store, had burst in wielding a knife and was savagely stabbing Ms. Hung without hesitation. The manager lunged forward to protect her in the struggle. The attacker's blade slashed his arm deeply, leaving him bleeding, but he continued to fight, shouting for help, trying desperately to pull Ms. Hong to safety. His cries drew the attention of neighboring shop workers, who immediately dialed 999 within minutes. The wail of sirens filled the air at 11:05 a.m. Emergency responders and police officers arrived at the scene. Paramedics rushed inside, administering first aid and working to stabilize the 2 victims before carrying them out on stretchers. Meanwhile, officers cordoned off the area, urging the growing crowd of bystanders to stay back. The once quiet neighborhood was now filled with disbelief. Many residents were in shock. They knew both women well. The victim, Ms. Tai Hong, born in 1990 in Thanh Ho Province, Vietnam, had been known as kind, gentle, and hardworking, married young, and a mother of 3. She had once lived a peaceful life in Vietnam, but financial hardship forced her to make a difficult decision in 2019 to leave her family and work in Singapore. Hoping to provide a better future for her children, she found employment at the Nippon Paint Store in Hougang, where she quickly proved to be a dedicated worker, selling paint, assisting customers, and handling store duties with care and professionalism. Over 5 years, Hong became the main breadwinner for her family, sending most of her salary home to support her 3 young children and her elderly parents. She lived in a shared apartment with other Vietnamese workers, conveniently located just above the store. Each morning, she would simply walk downstairs to start her shift, a routine that had once brought her comfort and stability. But on that December morning, everything changed forever. Friendly and approachable by nature, Hung quickly became well-liked by everyone around her. Her cheerful personality and bright, genuine smile made her a favorite, not only among her colleagues and the store owner, but also among regular customers, who often dropped by just to chat. Though small in stature, Hung's energy and efficiency at work left a strong impression on everyone. A fellow Vietnamese shopkeeper, a fruit seller who had also come to Singapore to build a better life, fondly described Hung as a kind-hearted soul who was always ready to help others. He shared that many locals in the neighborhood adored her and would often stop at the Nippon Paint Store just to greet her or exchange a few friendly words. Despite living far from home and enduring the loneliness of life abroad, Hong's heart always belonged to her family in Vietnam. She was the devoted mother of 3, a teenage daughter, a young son in primary school, and the youngest girl, just 7 years old. These 3 children were her greatest source of strength, inspiring her to keep working tirelessly in a foreign land. Friends often recalled how Hong would beam with joy whenever she showed them photos of her children, her eyes lighting up with pride and longing. She constantly talked about reuniting with them soon and had been saving to visit home in 2025. Her first trip back in years. She had even prepared gifts for her family for the upcoming Lunar New Year, but fate would never allow her that reunion though. Cheerful at work, Hong was known to be private about her personal life. She rarely spoke about her struggles or frustrations. That's why, when this horrific tragedy struck, everyone who knew her was left stunned. How could someone so gentle, so kind, become the victim of such senseless violence? Immediately after the incident, Singapore police moved swiftly, assigning their most experienced investigators to the case. Although the suspect, Do Xiaying, had been apprehended at the scene, the team needed to conduct a meticulous step-by-step investigation to uncover the full truth, to collect every piece of evidence, reconstruct the sequence of events, and, most importantly, determine the motive behind the attack. Preliminary assessments suggested the case stemmed from personal conflict, possibly resentment that had been quietly building over time. Yet one critical question remained. What had ignited such uncontrollable rage? To answer that, investigators began reconstructing the relationship between Hong and her attacker. Forensic experts scoured the scene, collecting every trace of evidence. The blood-stained knife found near the counter was immediately sent to the laboratory for analysis. The results were conclusive. Fingerprints and tissue samples on the handle matched Du Xiaying, and the victim's blood was found on the blade. Irrefutable proof that this was the murder weapon. Investigators also analyzed the blood spatter patterns throughout the store. The largest pool of blood was found near the front entrance, suggesting Hong had been attacked there while trying to escape. Smaller droplets leading further inside were believed to be from the suspect's own injuries sustained during the struggle. Altogether, these findings painted a clear picture of what had unfolded that morning. Forensic pathologists examined the victim's body. The autopsy revealed devastating details. 6 stab wounds, most concentrated on the upper back and neck. Several of them were deep enough to pierce major arteries in the lungs, leading to catastrophic blood loss. Despite emergency treatment, Hong succumbed to her injuries soon after arriving at the hospital. The report conclusively ruled out any accidental cause. This was an intentional, targeted attack. The estimated time of death matched the timeline of the assault, around noon on December 10th. In addition to the fatal wounds, there were numerous abrasions and defensive injuries on Hong's arms and knees, heartbreaking evidence that she had fought desperately for her life. Forensic experts also discovered another crucial clue. Markings on Hong's knees and arms indicated she had likely fallen while trying to escape. Investigators concluded that during her desperate attempt to flee, she either tripped or was forcefully pushed, crashing onto the hard floor, a moment that tragically allowed her attacker to catch up and continue the assault. This finding matched witness statements perfectly. Several people nearby had seen Hong trying to run toward the exit before stumbling, moments before the perpetrator reached her and carried out the fatal attack. As for Du Xiaying, the suspect, doctors performed a full medical examination. After his arrest, they found a deep cut on his right hand, likely caused when his own knife slipped as he struck with excessive force, along with several minor scratches across his body. After his wounds were stitched and stabilized, he was quickly discharged from the hospital and handed over to the police for formal detention. Toxicology reports later confirmed that at the time of the murder, Xiaying was completely sober. No traces of drugs or alcohol were found in his system. This critical detail reinforced the conclusion that the killing was premeditated and deliberate, not the result of intoxication or loss of control. The store manager, who had risked his life trying to protect Hong, became the most important eyewitness in the investigation. Still visibly shaken, he gave a detailed account of the terrifying scene that had unfolded. Before him, he testified that around 11 a.m., Xiaying, a former delivery worker who had been employed at the store months earlier, suddenly appeared without warning, carrying a small cloth bag. At that moment, Hong was standing behind the counter as usual. When she saw him, she froze in shock, her face instantly pale. As if she sensed danger without greeting or hesitation, Xia Ying stormed toward her. His expression dark and filled with anger, he began shouting loudly in Chinese, accusing and arguing with her, although the manager couldn't fully understand the words, as he primarily spoke English. He sensed from their tone and body language that the dispute was about money. Realizing the situation was escalating, the manager stepped forward, attempting to calm them and separate the two, but before he could act, Xia Ying reached into his cloth bag, pulled out a knife, and swung it violently. The manager instinctively raised his arm to block the blow. Suffering a deep cut across his forearm in agony, he backed away and screamed for Hong to run. Panicked, she turned toward the door, but in her haste, she struck a shelf and fell to the ground in that instant. Xia Ying closed the distance and attacked her mercilessly despite his injury. The manager tried to intervene again, but it was too late. The attack continued until Hong lay motionless on the floor. His testimony matched the accounts of witnesses outside the store, who had seen the suspect chasing and stabbing the victim near the entrance. When investigators cross-referenced these statements with forensic evidence, the sequence of events became tragically clear. Du Xiaoying had arrived fully prepared, weapon in hand, with clear intent to kill. Importantly, there was no evidence of any prior physical altercation or provocation. All findings indicated that Xia Ying was the aggressor, while Hong was completely defenseless, trying only to escape and call for help. This ruled out any possibility that the crime could be framed as self-defense or an accidental. The evidence already proved Xia Ying's guilt beyond doubt. One critical question remained: why? Investigators explored several possible motives: a hidden relationship, jealousy, or perhaps financial tension. But when the store owner was called in to testify, the truth he revealed shocked everyone. He explained that Du Xiaoying had indeed been a delivery worker at the Nippon Paint store and had worked alongside Hong for a period. Then, in July 2024, what seemed like a small, insignificant workplace disagreement took place, an incident that, at the time, no one could have imagined would lead to murder. The store owner recalled that, in July 2024, the paint shop had experienced a brief but tense disagreement between Hong and Du Xiaoying. It began with what seemed like a simple misunderstanding about work responsibilities, something that could have been easily resolved under normal circumstances. At the time, Xiaoying was responsible for delivering paint orders to customers, while Hong handled counter sales and invoices. One afternoon, a customer complained that their delivery had arrived late and included the wrong color. When the issue was traced back, Hong discovered that Xiaoying had failed to double-check the order form before dispatching it. She politely pointed out the mistake and offered to help fix it. But witnesses said Xiaoying reacted defensively and aggressively, claiming it was her fault for entering the wrong code. The store owner eventually reviewed the records and confirmed Hong had entered the correct information. As a result, Xiaoying received a formal warning. Though the reprimand was mild, it bruised his pride from that day onward. His attitude toward Hong completely changed. According to co-workers, he began showing signs of resentment and hostility, often muttering complaints under his breath whenever she spoke. Some even overheard him making harsh remarks, accusing her of trying to embarrass him in front of the boss. Still, Hong never responded. She continued to treat him with her usual kindness and professionalism, assuming he would eventually let go of the grudge. However, in September 2024, tensions rose again. Xia Ying had been arriving late and leaving early, prompting another warning from management. Believing that Hong had reported him, though there was no evidence she had, he became convinced she was deliberately trying to get him fired. Eventually, in October 2024, Xia Ying was terminated from his position after repeated absences and poor behavior. Witnesses later testified that when he received the dismissal notice, he appeared unusually calm but stared coldly at Hong before leaving the store. No one thought much of it at the time, assuming he would move on. But behind the scenes, Something darker was brewing after losing his job. Xia Ying struggled financially. He failed to find steady work, and resentment toward Hong festered. According to investigators, he began stalking her quietly, sometimes loitering near the store during her shifts. Several nearby vendors later admitted they had seen him walking past multiple times, but they assumed he was simply visiting old colleagues. Police later recovered CCTV footage showing Xia Ying visiting the area repeatedly in the days leading up to the murder, often carrying a small bag, the same one found at the crime scene. Inside it, detectives discovered not only the blood-stained knife, but also a folded handwritten note, written in Chinese. When translated, the note read, "You ruined my life. You took my job. You laughed at me today. I will make you remember my name." This chilling message confirmed what investigators had begun to suspect. The crime was motivated by revenge, born from wounded pride and festering hatred. In the following weeks, Singapore's media and public were deeply shaken. How could such a small workplace disagreement lead to a premeditated killing in broad daylight? During questioning, Xia Ying at first remained silent, refusing to cooperate, but after hours of interrogation, he finally admitted to losing control after months of anger and humiliation. He confessed that he had bought the knife 2 days before the attack, claiming he only intended to threaten Hong, not to kill her, an explanation that investigators rejected as inconsistent with the brutality of the crime. By early 2025, the prosecution had gathered a complete and airtight case. Every piece of evidence, from the forensic findings, witness accounts, CCTV footage, and the revenge note, painted one unmistakable picture. Xia Ying's attack was deliberate, calculated, and born from rage. The trial of Xia Ying began in the High Court of Singapore in early 2025. Drawing heavy media coverage and public attention, the courtroom was filled with reporters, legal observers, and members of Singapore's Vietnamese community, who had come to support Hong's grieving friends and relatives. The prosecution, led by Deputy Public Prosecutor Lim Wei Shen, presented a meticulous case from the first day. Lim asserted that the defendant had not acted out of sudden rage, but from long-nurtured resentment and premeditated intent. Every detail, the purchase of the knife, the handwritten note, and the repeated visits to Hong's workplace, pointed toward a deliberate plan to take her life. Prosecution opened with the chilling CCTV footage from December 10, 2024. The video showed Xia Ying entering the store carrying the cloth bag, then lunging toward Hong moments later. The footage left the courtroom silent. This was not an impulsive act. Lim declared it was an execution, fueled by hatred. To reinforce this argument, forensic experts were called to testify. They described in precise, clinical terms how the wounds had been inflicted and confirmed that the attack lasted no more than 30 seconds, an explosion of violence that demonstrated focused intent rather than uncontrolled emotion. The defense team, led by attorney Tan Ji-ming, attempted to argue for a reduced charge of culpable homicide, not amounting to murder, claiming that Xia Ying had been in a state of emotional distress and temporary loss of control. They presented the defendant as a man who had suffered humiliation, unemployment, and isolation, ultimately snapping under mental strain. Cross-examination quickly dismantled this narrative. The prosecution highlighted that the accused had no record of mental illness, had carefully brought a weapon to the scene, and had even written a note expressing his motive. A man who plans his revenge, brings a knife, and pens a declaration of hatred, Lim stated coldly, is not one who acted on impulse. He is one who acted with intent. Several witnesses also took the stand, including the store manager, who bravely relived the traumatic memory of that day, with visible tremors in his voice. He told the court how Hong had tried to flee, how he had shouted for help, and how Xia Ying had continued the assault even after she fell. His testimony moved many in the courtroom to tears. Next, the store owner confirmed that the argument in July 2024 was indeed minor, and that Hong had never reported or spoken ill of Xia Ying. She was a kind woman. The owner said softly she only ever tried to help her coworkers after several weeks of proceedings. Both sides presented their closing statements. The prosecution demanded the maximum penalty under Singapore's law for intentional murder. The death sentence, emphasizing the brutality of the act and the need for deterrence. The defense, in a last effort, pleaded for leniency, citing the defendant's cooperation after arrest and expressing remorse, but this claim of remorse was contradicted by his earlier statements and lack of apology to the victim's family. March 18, 2025. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Ong Wei Kiat delivered his verdict. The judge's voice was calm but firm as he read the judgment. The evidence presented leaves no doubt that the accused acted with clear, deliberate intent. His actions were calculated, cruel, and entirely unjustified. This court finds the accused, Du Xiaoying, guilty of murder under Section 300A of the Penal Code. The judge further added, "This tragedy serves as a stark reminder that no grievance, no matter how personal, justifies the taking of another human life." Upon hearing the sentence, Xiaoying showed little visible reaction. His expression remained blank, his eyes fixed on the floor outside the courthouse. Hong's co-workers and friends wept quietly, holding framed photos of her smiling face. Members of the Vietnamese community lit candles and offered prayers, vowing to remember her as a symbol of courage and kindness. Back in her hometown of Than Ho, Vietnam, Hong's family received the news with grief and disbelief. Her eldest daughter, upon learning of the verdict, said in a trembling voice, "My mother went abroad to give us a better life. She didn't deserve this." Her ashes were later returned to Vietnam, where hundreds attended her funeral, a final farewell to a mother, daughter, and friend whose gentle spirit had touched many in Singapore. The Nippon paint store resumed operations months later, but those who worked there admitted that the memory of that morning still haunted them. A small framed photo of Hong, with a vase of fresh flowers beside it, remains near the counter, a quiet memorial to a woman who simply wanted to work hard and return home to her children. Was notable and deeply unsettling during this crime scene reenactment was the calmness with which Du Xiaoying, referred to in earlier records as Xingor Yang, demonstrated his actions. Witnesses who observed the procedure, including forensic officers and investigators, described his demeanor as emotionless, detached, and disturbingly methodical. He retraced each step precisely from entering the store, placing his bag down near the counter, to drawing the knife and attacking Hong. There was no visible hesitation or sign of remorse. Investigators later reported that, when asked whether he regretted his actions, he merely responded, "She deserved to know what she did to me." This chilling remark further cemented the authorities' conclusion that the murder had been entirely premeditated, not a crime of passion or impulse. The evidence collected from the reenactment, combined with the findings from his electronic devices, provided a comprehensive timeline of how his resentment had evolved into states a cold-blooded plan for revenge. From the moment the handcart incident occurred, Xiaoying had perceived himself as a wronged man, someone humiliated, neglected, and robbed of dignity, despite his employer's efforts to de-escalate the situation by transferring him to another branch and even buying him a plane ticket home. His bitterness only grew. He could not accept that the conflict was over. Instead, he internalized it as an injustice that demanded retribution. Forensic psychologists later analyzed his mental state, describing his behavior as consistent with a narcissistic and vengeful personality, someone unable to accept personal responsibility, projecting blame outward, and seeking to restore balance through violence. The discovery of his internet search history painted an even clearer picture. Investigators found multiple entries related to how to leave Singapore quickly after a crime, murder, punishment, Singapore, and escape routes from Woodlands checkpoint. He had also searched for information about ferry routes and border controls, implying he had explored multiple exit strategies. Moreover, GPS data from his phone revealed that in the week before the attack, He had visited the area near the Nippon paint store at least 4 separate times, always in the morning. The same time, Hong typically began her shifts. He was seen loitering near food stalls, pretending to browse items, or walking slowly past the entrance. Several local vendors later recalled his presence vividly. One described him as having a strange, restless energy, pacing back and forth, often with a hood pulled over his head. Another said he seemed to be watching the shop carefully, as if waiting for someone. These testimonies, combined with the surveillance footage, confirmed that the attack was the culmination of a long, calculated build-up. It was not a spontaneous eruption of anger. It was planned vengeance. During a follow-up interview, one of Hong's friends recounted that Hong herself had begun feeling uneasy days before her death. She told her friend that she had seen her former co-worker near the market area twice that week, and had a bad feeling about it. Tragically, she dismissed it as coincidence, not wanting to cause unnecessary alarm. In the end, the investigation pieced together a detailed and irrefutable narrative. A workplace accident, small, unintentional, and already resolved, had triggered a chain of psychological deterioration in Xia Ying. His refusal to let go of perceived humiliation turned into obsession, and that obsession eventually consumed his rational mind. When questioned about the planning phase, he admitted that he had kept the knife hidden for days, waiting for the right moment when Hong would be alone. He also confessed that he had initially planned to flee Singapore the same afternoon after committing the murder, a plan that failed when police swiftly arrived on the scene. The investigators later remarked that what made the case so haunting was not only the brutality of the act but also the banality of its origin, a minor workplace mishap that spiraled into an act of unimaginable violence. Lead investigator summarized it best in his closing statement to the press. This case is a reminder that hatred, once left to grow unchecked, can distort reason and destroy lives. It started with a handcart accident, and it ended with a life lost and another forever condemned. Following the completion of the forensic and psychological analyses, the investigation phase formally concluded, and the case was handed over to the Singapore High Court for trial. The murder of Nguyen Thi Hong, a 33-year-old Vietnamese woman, had by then drawn significant public attention and sparked widespread grief across both the Vietnamese and Singaporean communities. When Do Jiaying appeared before the court for the first time, he was notably calm, showing no visible emotion, dressed in standard prison attire. His eyes remained downcast as the charges were read out. 1 count of premeditated murder, punishable by death under Section 300A of the Singapore Penal Code. The prosecution, led by Deputy Public Prosecutor Lim Wei Han, presented a compelling and meticulously detailed case. He began by outlining the full sequence of events from the workplace incident in July 2024 to the fatal attack in December of the same year, emphasizing that every stage of the crime reflected clear intent and preparation. This was not a momentary lapse of judgment. The prosecutor declared the accused armed himself with a knife, tracked the victim's schedule, and carried out an execution fueled by hatred and resentment. His actions show full awareness, planning, and moral culpability. Over the following days, the court heard from several key witnesses, including the store manager, local vendors, and forensic experts. The manager's emotional testimony once again brought the courtroom to silence as he described the horrific scene, Hong's desperate attempt to flee, her pleas for help, and his own helplessness as he watched her collapse. The forensic expert who conducted the autopsy confirmed the brutal nature of the attack, detailing the 6 stab wounds, their depth, and their fatal impact on major arteries. The medical evidence left no ambiguity about the cause of death or the degree of violence used. The defense counsel, on the other hand, tried to construct a line of reasoning centered around mental instability and emotional distress. They argued that the accused had been under extreme psychological pressure due to his job loss, financial struggles, and feelings of humiliation after the workplace accident. His defense lawyer claimed that these cumulative stresses had triggered an emotional breakdown, leading to a temporary loss of control. To support this, the defense called a psychiatrist, who testified that while the accused did not meet the criteria for any major mental illness, he exhibited borderline personality traits and an overly sensitive perception of injustice. However, the psychiatrist also confirmed that he was fully aware of his actions and the potential consequences when he committed the crime. This point became the turning moment in the trial. The prosecution seized on this expert testimony, reinforcing that awareness equates to accountability. He was not insane. Prosecutor Lim asserted he planned, he prepared, and he executed. His actions were deliberate. The accused did not lose control. He chose violence throughout the trial. Hong's family members attended via video link from Vietnam. Her mother, in a voice trembling with sorrow, gave a short victim impact statement. She spoke of her daughter's sacrifices, leaving her homeland to support her children, and the unbearable pain of knowing she would never come home again. "My daughter worked hard for her children," she said tearfully. "She did not deserve to die in such pain. So far from home, we only ask for justice." On the final day of trial, the presiding judge, Justice Tan Yong Kia, delivered his verdict after hours of deliberation. His voice was solemn and steady as he recounted the key findings of the case. The accused had carried the weapon intentionally. He had surveilled the victim for days. He had attacked without provocation. He had shown no genuine remorse or attempt to save the victim's life. Justice Tan emphasized that the evidence overwhelmingly proved premeditation. The motive, personal resentment, and perceived humiliation was entirely disproportionate to the act committed. The sanctity of human life cannot be undermined by personal grudges. The judge stated firmly this was an unprovoked and calculated killing. The court must send a clear message that such cruelty will not be tolerated. With that, the court found Du Xiaoying guilty of murder under Section 300A. Given the deliberate and calculated nature of the act, the judge ruled out the possibility of a reduced charge of culpable homicide. When asked if he had any final words before sentencing, Xiaoying stood silently for several seconds before muttering softly, "She destroyed my life." First, his statement only deepened the court's conviction that he lacked remorse or self-awareness. Justice Tan then pronounced the sentence for the murder of Nguyen Thi Hong. "The accused is hereby sentenced to death by hanging." The courtroom remained in heavy silence as the verdict was read outside. Members of the Vietnamese community gathered to light candles and place flowers near the paint store where Hong had once worked, the place where her life had been taken so cruelly. In the weeks following the trial, public discussion centered not only on the tragedy itself but also on the psychological roots of hatred and revenge. Commentators emphasized the need for better emotional education and conflict mediation in workplaces, employing migrant laborers, hoping to prevent such senseless loss in the future. As for Hong's family, they received overwhelming support from both Vietnamese associations and Singaporean residents. Her body was flown back to Vietnam for burial, fulfilling at last her wish to return home, though under the most heartbreaking of circumstances. In summary, the portrait that gradually emerged of Du Xiaoying was that of a man weighed down by resentment, isolation, and emotional instability. Although he appeared outwardly calm and quiet, those who had known him described a deep undercurrent of anger and self-pity that seemed to define his personality. Investigators found that after the workplace accident, his sense of victimhood had begun to dominate every aspect of his life. He repeatedly told his roommates and co-workers that he had been humiliated and betrayed, convincing himself that the world was conspiring against him. The more he replayed the event in his mind, the more distorted his perception became. What had once been a small, unintentional incident grew into an obsession that consumed him entirely. By the end of 2024, That obsession had hardened into hatred. He fixated on Hong as the root of all his misfortunes, the person who, in his view, had ruined his career, his pride, and his chance to rebuild a better life abroad. Each day he spent alone in his dormitory only deepened his anger. He had almost no social life, no close friends, and no emotional outlet. His roommates told investigators that even casual attempts at conversation were often met with silence or hostility. One of them recalled chillingly, "He wasn't loud, but there was something in his eyes when he spoke about that woman. It was as if he had already decided she would pay for what happened." The small but disturbing incident with the photograph, where he cut out Hong's image and threw it away, later became symbolic of the inner darkness he was descending into. It was no longer mere anger. It had turned into fixation despite the obvious warning signs. No one realized how dangerous he had become. His co-workers dismissed him as irritable, but harmless. His roommates avoided him altogether, and because he had no previous record of violence, there was nothing in the system to flag him as a threat. When police escorted him back to the crime scene for the official reenactment, officers and journalists alike noted how eerily composed he was. Step by step, he demonstrated how he had waited for Hong, how he drew the knife, how he chased her as she tried to flee. His tone remained flat, his expression blank. There was no remorse, only the mechanical repetition of movements, as if he were explaining someone else's actions rather than his own. That unnerving detachment convinced both investigators and prosecutors that they were dealing not with a man who had acted in blind rage, but with someone who had carefully nurtured his hatred until it crystallized into deliberate violence. By December 12, 2024, just 2 days after the murder, Singapore police announced that the investigation had gathered a full chain of conclusive evidence, including CCTV footage, eyewitness testimony, DNA, and fingerprint analysis, and the confirmed revenge motive that same day. Formal murder charges were filed in court. The community's shock deepened as media outlets began publishing details about the suspect's background. How could an ordinary migrant worker, with no history of crime, transform into a cold-blooded killer within months? Journalists from both Singapore and Vietnam covered the story extensively. Some described it as a tragic reflection of the hidden mental health struggles faced by migrant workers, the loneliness, alienation, and unaddressed emotional wounds that can fester into something catastrophic. Others emphasized that regardless of hardship, nothing could justify the brutality of his act. As for Du Xiaoying, he remained in custody at Changi Prison Complex, awaiting trial. During his initial psychiatric evaluation at the prison medical center, starting December 19, 2024, doctors observed his behavior for 3 weeks, though the final report was sealed. Sources close to the case indicated that he showed no signs of psychosis or severe mental illness. Instead, he was diagnosed with chronic anger issues and narcissistic traits, confirming that he had been fully aware of his actions and their consequences. His conclusion would later prove decisive in court, ensuring that no defense of temporary insanity or diminished responsibility could stand by. January 2025. The case officially entered its pretrial phase. The prosecution, led by Deputy Public Prosecutor Jia Lin, filed a capital charge of murder under Section 300A of the Penal Code, which carries a mandatory death sentence if convicted. In his opening statement, Jia Lin described the murder as a deliberate act of revenge, executed with planning and purpose. He argued that Du Xiaoying's actions demonstrated full awareness and intent. The accused, he said, had armed himself in advance, followed his target, and chosen the moment to strike when she was most vulnerable. The prosecution's case was built on several key pillars of evidence. CCTV footage clearly capturing Du trailing Hong from her workplace to the alley where the attack occurred. DNA and fingerprint matches on the knife, confirming it was the weapon used. Witness testimony from 2 passersby who saw the chase, and one who heard Hong's final screams. Confession statements recorded during interrogation, in which Du provided detailed descriptions, consistent with forensic evidence. Psychiatric reports showing that he was mentally stable and fully cognizant of his actions during the early hearings. The defense counsel attempted to argue for reduced culpability, suggesting that Du had acted in an emotional storm triggered by humiliation and loss. However, the presiding judge, Justice Teo Wei Meng, pointed out that the accused actions, purchasing a knife days earlier, stalking the victim, and waiting for the right moment, constituted clear premeditation throughout the proceedings. Du's demeanor was unnerving. He sat motionless, his face expressionless, rarely looking at anyone. When asked to confirm his confession in court, he nodded once and said in a low voice, "I did it. I wanted her to suffer like I did." Hong's family members, seated in the front row of the gallery, wept quietly as the statement was read aloud. Her younger sister, Nguyen To Lin, later gave a victim impact statement. "My sister came to Singapore to build a better life for our family. She never hurt anyone to die like this, so cruelly. We can't understand why someone would choose to destroy such a kind person." The prosecution highlighted that Du's fixation had developed over months, showing not a momentary lapse of control but a cold, obsessive determination. He was not provoked on that day. Jialin told the court he went there with a knife. He went there with the intent to kill. After weeks of witness testimony, forensic reports, and expert statements, the case reached its conclusion in March 2025. Justice Teo delivered his verdict in sentencing in a packed courtroom. The judge summarized, "The evidence before this court leaves no reasonable doubt. The accused meticulously planned his actions, pursued his victim, and executed a brutal act of revenge. His subsequent calmness and lack of remorse underscore his full awareness and intent with that." Justice Teo pronounced the sentence. Death by hanging. The courtroom fell silent. Du did not react. He neither looked up nor spoke. The interpreter beside him whispered the translated words, but he remained still, eyes fixed on the floor outside the courthouse. Reporters captured the raw grief of Hong's family and the mixed emotions of the Vietnamese community in Singapore. While many felt that justice had been served, others were struck by the deeper sadness of the case. How two lives, once intertwined by an accident, had both ended in tragedy. The weeks that followed, social media discussions across Vietnam, Singapore, and China reflected on the broader meaning of the case. Some viewed it as a cautionary tale about uncontrolled anger and resentment. Others saw it as a stark reminder of the mental and emotional toll of isolation among migrant workers. But for those who knew Hong personally, all those analyses meant little to them. She was simply a good person who didn't deserve to die. That with a Singapore prison service confirmed that Du Xiaoying was moved to Changi's death row wing in late March 2025, pending the automatic appeal process, a standard legal procedure in capital cases as of now. He awaits the final decision from the Court of Appeal. Though experts believe the chances of overturning the verdict are minimal, the size and depth of the shoe print suggested it belonged to a man of average build, possibly around 170 centimeters tall, weighing between 60 to 70 kilograms. The shoe itself was of leather material, not a common style worn by local workers, but more in line with what a white-collar office employee or salesman might wear. Investigators began to theorize that Jing's killer was someone familiar with her, possibly a customer or acquaintance who had visited the boutique before the crime scene. Lacked signs of forced entry. The front door and all windows were intact, implying that the victim had likely opened the door voluntarily. This detail pointed toward a crucial possibility. The murderer was someone she trusted enough to let in. Began a meticulous search for eyewitnesses. Shop owners nearby reported seeing a tall man wearing a dark coat and cap entering Jing's boutique around 8 p.m. that night. One witness, a food stall vendor across the street, recalled something strange. "He wasn't a regular customer. I noticed him standing outside the shop for a few minutes, Before going in, it looked like he was waiting for someone to leave. When shown photos of Jing's acquaintances and frequent customers, the vendor hesitated, then pointed to one face. It was Joe Wei, a 32-year-old local insurance agent who had previously visited the boutique several times to sell business coverage plans. Joe Wei was quickly brought in for questioning. From the start, his behavior struck investigators as evasive. He gave vague answers about his whereabouts on the night of November 16th, claiming he was at home watching television alone. But when officers cross-checked his alibi with phone location data, discrepancies appeared. His phone had been pinged near Nangong's Central Market, less than 300 meters from Jing's boutique, around 8:20 p.m. This discovery gave the police their first major breakthrough. A search warrant was issued for Joe's apartment. During the search, forensic teams found a pair of leather shoes that matched the exact sole pattern found on the staircase at the crime scene. More damning still, luminol tests on the shoes revealed faint blood traces invisible to the naked eye DNA. Testing later confirmed that the blood belonged to Jang Yun-lo. Confronted with the evidence, Joe initially maintained his innocence, insisting that the stains were paint or dirt. However, after several hours of questioning, his composure began to crack. Late that night, he finally broke down and confessed. But his confession only deepened the horror. Joe claimed that he and Jang had known each other for months. He had developed romantic feelings toward her, but she had rejected his advances repeatedly, emphasizing that she was happily married and not interested in anything beyond business. Joe, unable to accept this rejection, became obsessed in his twisted reasoning. If she wouldn't be his, he would make sure no one else could have her in that fateful evening. He waited until closing time and went to her boutique under the pretense of delivering a new insurance contract. Once inside, an argument erupted. According to Joe's statement, Jang tried to make him leave, which sent him into a rage. He grabbed her by the neck and strangled her with his bare hands until she stopped moving. When he realized she was dead, Joe panicked, but instead of fleeing, he committed an even more horrifying act. He violated her lifeless body, an act that forensic experts later confirmed. He then dragged her upstairs, attempting to stage the scene to mislead investigators into thinking it was a robbery or assault by a stranger. His attempt to erase evidence failed. The fingerprints on the staircase railing, the shoe print, and the distinctive slippers he had brought with him all became silent witnesses against him. Within 48 hours of his arrest, Joe Wei was formally charged with intentional homicide and desecration of a corpse, crimes that carried the death penalty under Chinese law. When a man loses both his wife and unborn child, grief usually consumes him. Confusion, anguish, disbelief. Yet, from the very first interaction, something about Jing's husband's demeanor had deeply unsettled Chief Investigator Fu Bin. His sorrow seemed oddly restrained, his tone composed, almost rehearsed. There were no emotional outbursts, no desperate questions about who had done this or why. Instead, he maintained a detached calmness that struck Fu Bin as unnatural. While such composure could, of course, be a personal coping mechanism in Fu Bin's decades of experience, this kind of reaction often hinted at something more. Quietly, he decided it was time to take a closer look at the grieving husband. A review of the couple's background revealed that their marriage had been far from perfect, though they had been together for nearly 4 years. Friends described their relationship as rocky. They quarreled often, usually about money and Jing's growing independence. She had recently begun managing the boutique entirely on her own and was earning a comfortable income, more, in fact, than her husband, who worked as a mid-level technician at a machinery firm. According to several acquaintances, this shift in financial balance had deeply bruised the husband's ego. He often complained that Jing didn't respect him anymore, and that she was too proud of her success. Some even recalled hearing him accuse her of being too friendly with her male customers, a claim they dismissed as insecurity. But to investigators, this remark suddenly felt significant, deeper. Fu Bin ordered a forensic re-examination of evidence collected from the scene. particularly the secondary male DNA found on Jing's neck. Previous tests had confirmed it did not match Wang Jingyu, the jealous admirer, nor Yuan Kai, the indebted factory worker, when the lab compared it to a fresh DNA sample taken from the husband. The results hit like a thunderclap. It was a perfect match. Every remaining uncertainty vanished. The second male DNA, found at the very site of strangulation, belonged to none other than Jing's husband still. Before drawing final conclusions, Fu Bin needed to understand why the husband's statements were reviewed again, and cracks began to appear. Initially, he claimed he had gone straight home after work and hadn't left all evening, but traffic camera footage from a nearby intersection, recovered days later from a backup storage unit, contradicted his story. Around 8:15 p.m. a camera caught a man on a motorcycle wearing a jacket identical to his, riding toward Nangong's commercial district, the very area where the boutique stood. When confronted with this evidence, the husband's calm facade finally began to crumble. He insisted that he couldn't remember leaving home, then that he had gone out only for a short ride. The inconsistencies piled up, and under mounting pressure, he finally confessed that evening. He had gone to the boutique after seeing a series of angry text messages Jing exchanged with Yuan Kai about the unpaid debt. Consumed by jealousy and convinced she was hiding something from him, he confronted her. The argument quickly escalated in a moment of uncontrollable rage. He grabbed her by the throat and strangled her. Realizing what he had done, he panicked to disguise the killing as a sexual assault. He staged the crime scene, pulling down her clothing and scattering evidence to suggest the presence of another man. He even planted cigarette butts and slippers to mislead investigators. His plan might have succeeded, if not for the small but irrefutable clue he left behind, his own DNA on her neck. The revelation shocked the entire town for weeks. Neighbors had mourned him as the heartbroken husband, a man who had lost everything now. The truth revealed him as the architect of the tragedy that destroyed his own family under Chinese law. Intentional homicide, particularly one committed with deliberate deception and moral cruelty, carried the most severe of penalties in the months that followed. His trial became one of the most closely followed cases in Rujiang's history. Soon after, the results came back, and what they revealed stunned everyone. Yuan Kai's DNA matched one of the two unidentified male profiles found on Jing's body. The confirmation hit like a thunderclap in the investigation room. After months of frustration, false leads, and sleepless nights, the detectives finally had a breakthrough, and this time it was solid. The polite, soft-spoken factory worker who had mourned his friend's death so convincingly was now scientifically tied to her murder. Discovery sent shockwaves through the precinct. Investigators recalled how calmly Yuan Kai had carried himself during questioning, how easily he'd slipped through their net. The first time he had never once hesitated, never contradicted himself, and yet every part of his story was built on a carefully crafted illusion. That calm, it turned out, wasn't innocence, it was confidence. The confidence of a man who believed he had outsmarted them. All detectives re-examined the timeline. The missing 90 minutes between 7 p.m. and 8:30 p.m. now looked damning. It was more than enough time to leave the bathhouse, cross the bridge, confront Jing at her shop, and return as if nothing had happened. The side door, once overlooked, was the perfect route for a killer to vanish and reappear without drawing suspicion. The forensic report further deepened the case. Along with the DNA match, analysts confirmed that the blood found beneath Jing's fingernails was a mix of her own and Yuan Kai's. That meant she had fought back the scratch marks on his forearms, which he had previously explained as factory injuries, now painted a darker picture. When officers brought Yuan Kai in for a second round of questioning, his composure finally began to crack. His usual calm tone faltered. His answers grew shorter, and his gaze darted to the floor. He still denied everything, insisting he had nothing to do with it. But the evidence was no longer on his side. Within days, police obtained a warrant for his arrest on suspicion of murder for the first time in months. The investigation had direction, but even then, one unsettling mystery remained. The second unknown male DNA profile. Who did it belong to? Was Yuan Kai acting alone, or was someone else with him that night? The victory of identifying the main suspect was tempered by that unanswered question, one that would soon unravel the case in ways no one could have predicted. His DNA matched perfectly with the biological traces found beneath Zhang's fingernails and inside the condom recovered from the awning the moment the report landed on the investigator's desk. The atmosphere in the room shifted after weeks of frustration and endless dead ends. They had finally identified the second unknown man, and with that, the picture of what truly happened began to take shape. The suspect's name was Zhang He, a 23-year-old local from Nangang County, unmarried, slim, and standing around 5 feet 7. He matched the behavioral and physical profile police had developed early. In the case, investigators quickly discovered that Zhang He worked part-time at a nearby construction site and occasionally helped at a local internet cafe. He had no prior criminal record and was described by those who knew him as quiet, withdrawn, and somewhat odd, the kind of man who blended easily into the background. When police brought him in for questioning, Zhang He initially denied any involvement, insisting he didn't even know the victim. But once confronted with the overwhelming forensic evidence, the DNA match from the condom, the traces beneath Zhang's nails, and the cigarette butt, his calm demeanor began to fracture. He grew pale, his hands trembling minutes later. He asked for water then, as silence filled the room. He finally spoke. "Yes, I was there, Zhang." His confession painted a horrific and tragic picture according to him. He had met Zhang a few times through mutual acquaintances in the marketplace. He claimed that on the night of the crime, he had seen her arguing with another man outside the shop, a man later identified as Yuan Kai, and after that man left, he approached her. He claimed their interaction turned violent when she rejected his advances, leading to a struggle that ended with her death. For the investigators, the confession confirmed what the DNA had already revealed, but it also clarified the tangled sequence of that night's events. Yuan Kai had indeed gone to the boutique that evening, as he admitted, but had left Zhang alive moments later. Zhang He arrived, and it was he who turned a confrontation into a killing. Discovery of Zhang He's identity closed one of the most frustrating chapters in Zhang's investigative history yet, for the officers who had spent sleepless nights piecing together this puzzle. The feeling was bittersweet. The truth had finally come to light, but it revealed a tragedy born of coincidence to men, both connected to Zhang for very different reasons, crossing paths with her on the same ill-fated night. In his full confession, Zhang, he described the night with chilling clarity, a sequence of choices and impulses that spiraled beyond control. After finishing his shift at the construction site, he said, he wandered toward the market, restless and unable to sleep. That's when he saw Zhang's boutique. The light still on, despite the late hour. Through the half-drawn curtain, he noticed her pacing, talking on the phone, likely during her heated exchange with Yuan Kai. When Yuan Kai left Jiang, he lingered outside. Watching, he told police he had always been drawn to Zhang. He'd seen her several times before, when passing the boutique, sometimes exchanging casual greetings, but she had never paid him much attention that night. Emboldened by the darkness, and perhaps by alcohol, he decided to approach her. He claimed that, when he knocked on the door, Zhang hesitated before letting him in. He made small talk at first, pretending he wanted to buy something, but as the minutes passed, his tone shifted. He confessed that he couldn't control himself. When Zhang tried to push him away, he grabbed her, insisting she stay quiet. A violent struggle followed. Zhang scratched desperately at his face and neck, the same scratches where investigators later found her DNA beneath his nails. In the chaos, Jiang, he strangled her. After realizing what he had done, he panicked. He said he didn't mean to kill her, but in terror, he decided to stage the scene. He scattered items across the room to make it look like a robbery, then assaulted her body. Trying to erase any sign of his identity, he used a condom, but in his haste, left it behind, the very clue that would ultimately expose him before fleeing. He smoked a cigarette to calm his nerves and dropped it near the door without realizing it. When asked why he returned to the area in the following days, Jiang He said he wanted to see if anyone had found her. Several witnesses had indeed reported seeing a slim man on a bicycle passing the boutique on the nights following the murder. At the time, it meant little, but now it fit perfectly into the puzzle as his confession continued. Seasoned officers felt an uneasy mix of vindication and horror. Every unanswered question, the missing timeline, the unexplained DNA. The second suspect finally had an explanation, yet the clarity of Jiang He's words only deepened the tragedy. This was not a planned act of revenge or a crime of profit. It was an impulsive, senseless killing born of obsession and opportunity. The court proceedings that followed drew intense public attention. Jiang He was charged with rape and murder under aggravating circumstances during the trial. His defense argued diminished capacity, citing mental instability and isolation, but the prosecution emphasized the brutality of the act, the deliberate staging of the crime scene, and the attempt to conceal evidence. The verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts. When the sentence was read, death by lethal injection, Jiang He showed little emotion. He simply bowed his head and whispered, "I'm sorry for the investigative team, especially Detective De Fubin and Chief Guan Long." It marked the end of a harrowing chapter, yet the emotional toll lingered. Fubin would later write in his report, "Every case teaches us something about patience, about human nature, and about how evil often hides behind the face of the ordinary." Jiang's family, who had endured weeks of agony and uncertainty, finally received justice, but even justice could not erase the loss. A young woman whose life, an unborn child, were stolen in a moment of cruelty. And for the detectives of Juge, the case became a lasting reminder. No alibi is perfect, no clue too small, and no truth hidden forever. Coil and cover their noses. The unmistakable smell of decomposition filled the cool Iowa air. Inside the suitcase lay a woman's body, curled tightly as if folded to fit the confined space. Her skin had taken on a grayish hue, and her hands were bound with duct tape. It was a scene that stunned even the most seasoned officers. The woman was later identified as Melissa Collins, a 32-year-old accountant who had been reported missing just 3 days earlier. She lived alone in an apartment barely 2 miles from Dolphin Lake. Friends described her as quiet, hardworking, and meticulous, the kind of person who never missed work without notice. When she failed to show up at her office on Tuesday morning and stopped answering her phone, her colleagues immediately contacted police. Investigators quickly sealed off the parking lot and began their forensic sweep. The Camry's license plate was traced to Rob Hayes, Melissa's ex-boyfriend, a 35-year-old mechanic with a history of domestic disputes. Officers learned that Melissa and Rob had broken up 2 months earlier after a volatile 3-year relationship. Neighbors recalled hearing frequent shouting matches before she finally told friends she was done for good. Inside the trunk, technicians collected several critical pieces of evidence: a stray hair stuck to the duct tape, a single cigarette butt, and faint fingerprints on the handle of the suitcase. Even before lab results arrived, detectives felt a grim certainty forming: the car, the victim, the past abuse. All threads led toward Rob Hayes. By dawn, a team was already at his residence. The small 1-story house sat on the outskirts of town, its front yard littered with car parts and oil cans. When officers knocked, Rob opened the door wearing grease-stained overalls, visibly nervous but trying to appear calm. He claimed he hadn't seen Melissa in weeks. However, a faint smell of bleach hung in the air, and on the kitchen counter sat an open pack of cigarettes, the same brand found in the trunk. Police brought him in for questioning. At first, Rob denied everything. He insisted Melissa must have left town with someone else, but inconsistencies crept into his story. He said he had spent Friday night fixing a friend's car, yet couldn't Name the friend surveillance. Footage from a nearby gas station at 9:47 p.m. showed Melissa's Camry pulling in, with a man matching Rob's build behind the wheel when confronted with the footage. Rob's composure cracked. He admitted he had met Melissa that night, saying she'd called to talk things over and collect some of her belongings. Still at his house, he claimed they argued, that she slapped him, and that he lost control. According to him, he pushed her, she fell, hit her head on the edge of a toolbox, and stopped moving. Panicked, he said. He wrapped her body in a blanket, stuffed it in the suitcase, and drove to Dolphin Lake Apartments, a place he once lived, to dump it. But investigators weren't convinced it was an accident. Autopsy results revealed Melissa had suffered manual strangulation and severe bruising on both wrists, consistent with restraint. The head injury Rob described was superficial. This wasn't panic. It was deliberate. The hair found on the duct tape matched Rob's DNA, and the cigarette butt carried his saliva when the evidence was presented. Rob fell silent for a long time before whispering, "I didn't mean for it to go that far." His face turned pale as detectives read him his rights. He was charged with first-degree murder, abuse of a corpse, and tampering with evidence. The case shocked the quiet Iowa community during trial. Prosecutors portrayed Rob as a jealous, controlling man who couldn't accept rejection. They showed text messages in which Melissa told a friend she feared, "He might hurt me if I don't stay quiet." The jury took less than 4 hours to deliberate. Rob Hayes was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. At Melissa's memorial, her sister spoke through tears. She tried to move on. She did everything right, but evil still found her. The yellow Camry was later towed and destroyed. But for investigators, the memory of that night at Dolphin Lake Apartments would never fade. A haunting reminder that even in the calmest corners of the world, darkness can lurk quietly, waiting for the smallest spark to ignite tragedy. Had spoken with her daughter was just days before her disappearance. Shotong had seemed cheerful and calm, talking about her classes, her part-time job, and her plans for the upcoming semester. There was no hint of trouble, no sign that she was afraid or in danger. Her mother recalled that Shotong even mentioned her boyfriend, saying he was very kind and often helped her with errands and studies. But behind that ordinary facade, something dark was brewing. Investigators soon uncovered that the relationship between Shotong and Shangnan was far from perfect. Friends of the victim revealed that the two often argued, sometimes heatedly, about jealousy and control. Shangnan, who was in his mid-20s and also from China, had a reputation for being possessive. One classmate recalled seeing him waiting outside Shotong's lectures, following her almost everywhere. He would reportedly question her whenever she spoke to male classmates. Then, in August 2014, just weeks before the murder, Shotong made a difficult decision. She told a friend she wanted to end the relationship once and for all, saying, "I can't handle it anymore. I'm scared he'll do something crazy." That fear proved tragically prophetic. After she told him she wanted to break up, Shangnan's demeanor changed completely. Neighbors at his apartment complex later told police that they often heard shouting from inside his unit. One recalled seeing Shotong leave in tears one evening, clutching her phone. The final pieces fell into place when investigators reviewed Xiangnan's purchases in the days before her disappearance. The suitcase, the dumbbells, the towel, each item fit together like a dark puzzle, revealing methodical preparation. He had planned every step after the killing. Xiangnan stayed one night in his apartment, hastily packing his belongings before taking an early flight out of Cedar Rapids the next morning. He left behind Shotong's car in the parking lot, locked, with her lifeless body sealed inside the trunk. In the months that followed, her story became a cautionary tale across Chinese student communities in the United States. Many who knew her described her as gentle, humble, and hardworking, a young woman who came to America chasing a dream, only to become the victim of someone she once trusted. Her father later said in an interview, his voice trembling, She was supposed to graduate that spring. We had already booked our tickets to attend her ceremony now. All I can do is visit her grave, even years later, as new generations of students arrive in the US with the same hopes and ambitions. The story of Xiaotong remains a haunting reminder of how love can twist into obsession, and how a single act of violence can destroy countless lives across oceans despite the overwhelming evidence pointing to Xiangnan. Justice for Xiaotong proved to be elusive because he had fled to China immediately after the crime. The U.S. authorities faced an enormous obstacle: extradition. While both countries had cooperated in criminal matters before, China and the United States do not share a formal extradition treaty. That meant, even though Iowa police had built a strong case, complete with surveillance footage, purchase receipts, forensic results, and digital records, they couldn't simply demand Xiangnan's return, issued a red notice for his arrest, effectively marking him as an international fugitive. But without China's cooperation, he could not be forcibly removed from Chinese territory. U.S. authorities had little choice but to forward all their evidence through diplomatic channels, hoping that Chinese law enforcement would take up the case. Domestically, months passed with no public update. Xiaotong's parents, now living in unimaginable grief, wrote letters to both the Chinese and American governments, pleading for justice. They even traveled to Beijing several times to meet with officials, carrying with them binders filled with translated court documents, photos of their daughter, and printouts of police reports from Iowa. Her mother once said through tears to a reporter, "We can't sleep, we can't eat, we don't want revenge, we only want the truth to be known, and the man who killed our daughter to face the law." Meanwhile, journalists and Chinese students across American campuses began following the case closely. Social media platforms in China lit up with discussions about safety abroad, relationships, and the loneliness many international students face. Some users condemned the suspect's cruelty, while others empathized with the parents' heartbreak, saying they sent their daughter to study in a safe country, and now they can only bring back her ashes. In 2016, nearly 2 years after the murder, there was finally movement. Chinese authorities confirmed that they had detained Xiangnan in Wenzhou, a coastal city in Zhejiang province. After tracking his passport activity and financial transactions, he was reportedly living quietly, avoiding contact with former classmates or online friends. When questioned by police, Xiangnan initially denied everything, claiming he and Xiaotong had driven to a park and that she had left him afterward. But when presented with photographic evidence, the store receipts, the dumbbell records, and his fingerprints on the suitcase, he fell silent. Investigators said he eventually confessed, his statement eerily consistent with what Iowa police had reconstructed: a moment of rage, a fatal act, and a failed attempt to hide the body, because the murder had occurred on U.S. soil. Chinese prosecutors faced a complex legal situation, however. Under China's criminal law, Article 7, Chinese citizens who commit serious crimes abroad can be prosecuted domestically if the act is punishable by more than 3 years of imprisonment, including murder. A trial was scheduled in Wenzhou Intermediate People's Court. It was attended by Xiaotong's grieving parents, who sat quietly throughout, holding a photo of their daughter in a simple silver frame during the proceedings. Xiangnan appeared calm but detached. He admitted to killing Xiaotong after she tried to end their relationship, saying he lost control and didn't mean to cause her death. Prosecutors, however, emphasized his deliberate preparation, purchasing the suitcase, weights, and towel beforehand, as proof of premeditation. After several days of testimony and evidence review, the court announced its verdict. Xiangnan was found guilty of intentional homicide and sentenced to life imprisonment for Xiaotong's parents. The ruling brought partial closure, but not peace. Her father told reporters outside the courthouse, "No sentence can bring our daughter back. But at least the world now knows the truth." Back in Iowa, a small memorial was held on the campus of Iowa State University. Dozens of students, both American and Chinese, gathered by the campus lake holding candles that reflected softly on the water. Her professors remembered her as diligent, kind, and full of potential today. Her story is often used in safety orientation sessions for new international students, not to spread fear, but to remind them of the importance of communication, community, and awareness. And, in Dalian, at the edge of her family's hometown, a white gravestone bears her name in both Chinese and English, in memory of Xiao Tong. 1995 to 2014, she came to learn, to dream, and to shine. The world was not kind, but her light remains. It stands not only as a tribute to a young life cut short, but as a lasting reminder of how love, when poisoned by obsession and control, can turn into something unimaginably dark. In the years following the verdict, Xiao Tong's case continued to echo across both the United States and China, symbolizing not only the tragedy of a young woman's lost future, but also the delicate bridge of justice between two nations divided by legal systems and oceans. Her parents returned to Dalian with their daughter's ashes in early 2017, the moment their plane landed. Reporters and cameras surrounded them, but they said nothing, just quietly held the small white urn wrapped in a silk cloth. Her mother later recalled that the sound of the airplane engine reminded her of the nights she used to wait for her daughter's calls from Iowa, when time zones separated them, but love never did. When we finally brought her home, she whispered in an interview years later, the sky over Dalian was raining. Maybe she didn't want us to see her tears after the burial. Her family turned their grief into a mission. They began speaking at universities and community centers about mental health, relationship red flags, and the importance of communication for students studying abroad. They urged parents not to rely solely on grades or updates, but to truly ask how their children were coping, whether they were lonely or if they felt safe back in Iowa. Police officers who had worked the case never forgot it. Detective Maria Evans, one of the lead investigators, described it as one of the most emotionally draining cases of her career. Everything about it stuck with us: the suitcase, the towel, the quiet parking lot. She said, we deal with many crimes, but this one, it felt personal. She was just a kid trying to chase her dreams. In the years that followed, the Dolphin Lake apartments were eventually remodeled, and Building 44 was repainted and renamed. Yet longtime residents said that sometimes, on quiet September nights, people would still leave a single flower beneath the spot where the yellow Toyota Camry was found. No plaque, no name, just a silent gesture for a girl far from home. Meanwhile, Shengnan spent his days behind the gray walls of a prison in Zhejiang. Inmates described him as withdrawn, keeping to himself, reading English books, and occasionally helping others write letters. According to official reports, he showed cooperative behavior and signs of remorse, but too many. That remorse came far too late for Xiao Tong's parents. Closure never truly arrived. On each Mid-Autumn festival, they visit her grave with mooncakes and chrysanthemums. They light incense and speak softly to the stone, updating her about the seasons, about her old friends, about how proud they still are of her. Her mother always ends with the same words: you once said you wanted to change the world. My child, maybe you still are, just in a different way. Her story became the subject of documentaries and investigative programs in both countries. It sparked conversations about cross-cultural relationships, domestic violence among young couples abroad, and the responsibilities of schools to protect international students. Iowa State University later introduced new orientation materials, teaching students about warning signs of manipulation and abuse in relationships, changes that many quietly credited to the memory of one lost student. In China, her case was discussed in law schools as an example of extraterritorial jurisdiction, how a nation can try one of its citizens for crimes committed beyond its borders. Legal scholars debated the implications, emphasizing how her case had quietly reshaped cooperation between U.S. and Chinese law enforcement in later years. 10 years have now passed, the world has changed, but in the heart of Dalian, her story still lingers, The piano in her parents' living room remains untouched, still tuned, the last note she ever played, fading into silence. And in Iowa, near the engineering building where she once studied, a cherry tree now stands planted by her friends. It blossoms every spring with pale pink petals that drift gently into the campus lake. A small brass plaque beneath it reads, "For Xiaotong, your kindness, your laughter, your light, you are remembered, though justice was served." The tragedy remains a haunting reminder of how easily love can turn into possession, and how the pursuit of dreams can sometimes meet the darkest parts of human nature. Yet through the sorrow, one truth endures. Xiaotong's story still saves lives and formally requested cooperation in locating the suspect. Xiangnan, the U.S. Department of Justice, working alongside the Chinese Ministry of Public Security, shared the complete case file, including forensic evidence, witness statements, and flight records confirming Xiangnan's departure from Chicago to Shanghai. Just 2 days after the murder, the request was made, under the framework of mutual legal assistance. Even though no extradition treaty existed between the two countries, Chinese officials acknowledged receipt of the materials and confirmed that Xiangnan was indeed a Chinese citizen, meaning, under Chinese law, he could be prosecuted domestically for crimes committed abroad, provided sufficient evidence was presented back in Iowa. Investigators and prosecutors held a press conference detailing the progress of the case. Local police chief Mark Roberts described it as one of the most challenging cases in recent years, both legally and emotionally. "We know who did this, we know how it happened, what we don't know is when justice will catch up to him," he said. At the same time, the story spread rapidly through Chinese media and student circles, triggering nationwide outrage. Many netizens expressed disbelief that a young, promising woman who had come to America, chasing her dreams, had been killed by someone from her own community. The hashtag Find Xiangnan trended across platforms like Weibo and Jihu, with thousands posting screenshots, flight manifests, and even speculative sightings. Some users pointed out that Xiangnan's online accounts on Renren and QQ had gone inactive the day after his flight, suggesting a calculated disappearance. Others began digging into his background, tracing his hometown, his parents, and his previous academic records. The situation drew parallels to older unresolved cross-border cases, highlighting the legal gap between two nations' justice systems. While the online search continued, Chinese authorities quietly opened an internal investigation in early 2017. Police in Zhejiang province began tracing financial records linked to Xiangnan's family. They discovered multiple cash transfers totaling around 35,000 yuan, sent from his U.S. bank account to his parents' address days before he fled. It was enough for the authorities to begin a formal case filing for intentional homicide committed abroad. Meanwhile, Xiaotong's parents remained in Iowa for several weeks, working closely with the university and local police. Every morning, they would visit the memorial site near Dolphin Lake Apartments, where students had left candles, origami cranes, and notes written in both English and Chinese. Her mother often stood there for hours, silently touching the small white cross marked with her daughter's name. "She was our only child," she told reporters. "She studied so hard to make us proud. I never imagined her life would end like this." Far from home, when the official arrest notice for Xiangnan was finally issued in China, it marked a rare moment of international cooperation. The Ministry of Public Security announced that they had detained the suspect in his hometown after weeks of tracking his digital footprint. Chinese state media reported that he had been living under a relative's identity in a rural area of Fujian, rarely leaving home and avoiding contact with anyone outside his family. Under interrogation, Xiangnan initially denied any involvement, claiming that he had left the U.S. before anything happened. However, when presented with forensic evidence, including fingerprints, hotel surveillance, and blood traces matching Xiaotong's DNA, he broke down in a quiet, emotionless tone. He admitted to losing control after an argument, but insisted it was not intentional. Chinese prosecutors later confirmed that Xiang Nan was charged with intentional homicide, a charge that carries the possibility of life imprisonment or even the death penalty under Chinese law. The trial, held in the Intermediate People's Court of Ningbo, drew massive public attention. Reporters from both Chinese and American outlets attended, and the courtroom was filled with observers, many of them parents of students studying abroad during the proceedings. Xiang Nan appeared pale. Dressed in a plain gray prison uniform, he kept his head lowered as the prosecution presented images of the crime scene and the emotional testimonies of Xiao Tong's parents, who had traveled across the ocean once more to attend when given a chance to speak. Xiang Nan's voice trembled slightly. "I regret what I did. I know no apology can bring her back, but to her parents." Those words meant little. Her father, holding a framed photo of his daughter, simply said, "You took away our light, you destroyed our lives. Whatever happens to you now will never be enough." After 3 days of hearings, the court pronounced Xiang Nan guilty of intentional homicide and sentenced him to life imprisonment. The verdict was met with quiet applause and tears from those in attendance. The ruling was later recognized by both US and Chinese officials as a landmark case in cross-border criminal justice, one that showed the possibility of accountability even without an extradition treaty. As Xiao Tong's parents later said in a quiet interview before returning home, "Justice may have been done, but peace will never return to our hearts." The aftermath of the case rippled far beyond Iowa and Ningbo. Within weeks of Xiang Nan's sentencing, universities across the United States began reviewing their student welfare and international support systems, especially for students from abroad who often faced isolation, cultural pressure, and relationship stress. With little institutional guidance at Iowa State University, where Xiao Tong had studied, the administration established the Xiao Tong Memorial Scholarship, a fund supporting Chinese students pursuing science and engineering degrees. The scholarship was created not only to honor her memory, but also to promote awareness of mental health, personal safety, and relationship boundaries among international students. In a statement, the university president said, "This tragedy has taught us that safety doesn't end at the classroom door. We must build bridges of understanding and protection for every student, wherever they come from." The scholarship launch ceremony was held at the campus garden, where a magnolia tree was planted beside the engineering building, her favorite spot to study friends and professors, many of them recalling her intelligence, quiet humor, and kindness. A professor from the chemistry department spoke emotionally. "She was the kind of student every teacher hopes to have, curious, patient, and full of promise. To lose her this way, it's something that stays with you." Meanwhile, the Chinese international student community reacted with a mixture of grief and anger. Online forums, like Weibo and Jihu, filled with posts from students studying abroad who shared their fears and frustrations. Many wrote that they saw themselves in Shotong Young, far from home, trusting people who spoke their language, believing they'd found comfort in familiarity. Hashtags like #ProtectChineseStudentsAbroad and #Justice for Shiao Tong trended for weeks. Thousands of posts called for more counseling resources, emergency hotlines, and stronger background checks for foreign student relationships. Some Chinese embassies even began publishing safety manuals and offering workshops about dating violence, emotional control, and legal systems in foreign countries. At the government level, the U.S. Department of State and China's Ministry of Education both issued joint statements urging cooperation to improve safety awareness among students studying internationally. The case became a central example in diplomatic discussions on cross-border law enforcement collaboration, with scholars citing it as a precedent for transnational justice without extradition. Behind the political and social reforms, the emotional wounds remained raw for those closest to the victim. Xiao Tong's parents returned to Dalian with their daughter's ashes 6 months after the verdict. Local journalists described their home as quiet, the walls covered with framed photographs of her smiling in her graduation gown, her piano recitals, and family trips. Her mother reportedly refused to move any of her daughter's belongings. The piano, the desk, even her favorite books remained untouched every evening. She lit a candle before her daughter's picture. In one televised interview, her father said softly, "We brought her into this world with love, and we sent her away with heartbreak. We can only hope that other parents never have to experience this pain." The story also sparked debates in China about the psychological toll of studying abroad, especially on young students sent overseas too early, burdened by high expectations and cultural isolation. Newspapers and documentaries began exploring how emotional dependency, jealousy, and unaddressed mental health issues could escalate into violence, particularly among students without family or community support nearby. In the years following the case, several organizations were founded in her memory, including one named Light Across Oceans, a non-profit dedicated to supporting Chinese students studying overseas, offering counseling, mentorship, and emergency legal aid. As for Shangnan, he continued to serve his life sentence in Zhejiang Province prison. Reports from local media suggested he became withdrawn and largely silent, refusing interviews and keeping to himself. Some prison staff noted he spent much of his time reading and writing letters that were never sent, but for most people who followed the case, there was little sympathy left for them. He was not just a man who lost control, he was the person who turned love into possession, and possession into tragedy. To this day, on the anniversary of her death, students at Iowa State still place white lilies by the magnolia tree that bears her name, a quiet reminder of a dream cut short, and of a justice that crossed oceans to be served 1 year later, under a gentle spring sky. The magnolia tree on Iowa State's campus was in full bloom. Pale pink petals swayed in the breeze, scattering softly over the stone plaque that bore her name in memory of Xiao Tong. A brilliant light gone too soon that afternoon. A quiet couple stood beneath the branches. They were her parents, who had finally gathered the strength to make the long journey from Dalian to Ames. Her father held a small urn close to his chest. Her mother clutched a white lily, the same flower students left here each year. They had come to fulfill what should have been a joyful trip in another life. They would have flown to attend her graduation ceremony, watched her cross the stage, smiled through tears as she waved her diploma, but instead, they were here to say goodbye. The campus was calm, filled with the sounds of birds and distant laughter from students passing by. The kind of life Shotong had loved. Her mother knelt, brushing away fallen petals from the plaque. Her hands trembled as she placed the lily down for a long while. She said nothing then. In a voice heavy with love and sorrow, she whispered, "Tong Tong, we came, just like we promised. You're finally home now." Her father gently opened the urn, letting a small handful of ashes fall at the base of the magnolia tree. The ashes mingled with the soil, part of the earth, part of the roots that would bloom each spring. For a moment, the wind picked up. A flurry of petals rose into the air, swirling in circles before drifting down again. Her father looked up, eyes glistening. "She's smiling," he murmured. She always loved the wind nearby. A group of Chinese students stood quietly, watching from a respectful distance. Some of them had never met her, but they knew her story. They had read about it, shared it online, grieved for her across screens and borders. A young woman stepped forward, placing a folded paper crane by the plaque. Written inside were the words, "For every girl who went abroad to chase her dreams, may you always return home safely." As the sun dipped low, the magnolia petals began to fall faster, carpeting the ground in soft pink. Her parents stood together, hand in hand, watching as the last light faded behind the engineering building. In that silence, it felt as though Xiao Tong was still there, laughing quietly among the blossoms, her spirit woven into the gentle Iowa breeze. When they finally turned to leave, her mother looked back one last time. "You see, Tong Tong," she said through her tears, "the whole world remembers you now. upon learning the full truth from the authorities. Lee's father, a veteran police officer, was devastated. His son, whom he had raised to be disciplined and honorable, had committed a brutal murder on foreign soil. The shock tore through the family that night. He didn't speak a word, merely sat in silence, staring at his police badge. The following morning, he made a decision that would change everything. He went to the local public security bureau and personally reported his son's whereabouts as a policeman. He said to the officers, voice trembling but firm, "I cannot protect my son by hiding the truth. If he did wrong, he must face justice, just as any man would under his father's persuasion." Li Shengnan, also written as Shengnan, finally surrendered himself at the Wenzhou Public Security Bureau in Zhujiang on May 23, 2015. More than 8 months after the murder of Xiao Tong. During interrogation, Li was visibly nervous, often trembling and speaking in a low, broken voice at first. He tried to claim that death was accidental, that they had only argued, and she had fallen unconscious, but confronted with overwhelming evidence from both American and Chinese investigators, the hotel blood traces, DNA, surveillance videos of the suitcase, and dumbbell purchases, he broke down through tears. Li admitted, "I didn't mean to kill her. I just lost control. She said she didn't love me anymore. I couldn't accept it," but his tears could not erase the horror of what he had done. The prosecution presented a detailed reconstruction of the crime. Li strangled Xiao Tong in a fit of rage, wrapped her head in a towel, and packed her body into the suitcase he had deliberately purchased days before. He placed a 20-pound dumbbell inside to weigh it down, intending to dump it in the river, but failed when he found the water too shallow. Panicked and fearful, he left the car in the Dolphin Lake Apartments parking lot, abandoned everything, and fled the United States within hours. In the March 2016 trial, the Wenzhou Intermediate People's Court meticulously reviewed every aspect of the case, from the psychological deterioration of Li's relationship with Xiao Tong to the cold, methodical actions he took before and after the killing. Both Chinese and American forensic experts had verified the evidence, and even Li's own statements matched the physical findings after several days of testimony. The court reached its decision. The presiding judge declared that Li Shengnan's actions constituted intentional homicide, noting that his crime was especially cruel, with severe consequences, causing great harm to both families and society. Li's face remained expressionless as the verdict was read. Death sentence with a 2-year reprieve. The sentence meant that Li would be executed if he failed to show genuine reform within 2 years. But if he demonstrated remorse and good behavior, it could be commuted to life imprisonment. As the gavel struck, Li's mother sobbed uncontrollably in the courtroom, while Xiao Tong's parents sat motionless. Her father clutched a small framed photo of his daughter, his expression unreadable: grief, anger, exhaustion, and disbelief intertwined. In the following press conference, the Chinese Ministry of Public Security emphasized the unprecedented cooperation between China and the United States in handling the case, stating that justice transcended borders and that the death of an innocent student abroad must not go unanswered for Xiao Tong's family. Though no verdict could fill the void left behind, her mother later said in an interview, voice breaking, "We don't hate him. We just want our daughter to rest peacefully, and for no other girl to meet the same fate." In the years that followed, Iowa State University established a scholarship fund in Xiao Tong's name, supporting international students pursuing science and engineering. Each spring, when the magnolia trees bloomed across the campus, students would leave small white flowers beneath her memorial stone, a quiet reminder of a young woman who came to America chasing dreams, and whose life was taken by the man who claimed to love her. Even as time passed, her story continued to echo through classrooms, dormitories, and social media, a heartbreaking warning and a lasting testament that no matter how far one travels, justice, compassion, and remembrance can cross oceans. Tuto, him shocked and devastated, Li's father realized the gravity of what his son had done. and knew there was no longer any way to conceal it, he immediately contacted the authorities and urged Xian to turn himself in. After several rounds of persuasion from his parents and police, Xian finally agreed on May 14, 2015. He walked into the Wanzhou Police Bureau and formally surrendered during interrogation. Xian appeared visibly nervous, but cooperative. He confessed in full detail, admitting to killing Xiaoheng in a moment of rage. After she told him she'll no longer wanted to be with him, he claimed he had not planned a murder in advance, but admitted that his actions after the crime, buying a suitcase, moving her body, and fleeing, were deliberate attempts to cover it up. He repeatedly expressed regret and stated that he lost control because of jealousy and humiliation, however, found enough evidence suggesting a degree of premeditation. Surveillance footage confirmed that he had purchased a suitcase and dumbbells before meeting Xiaoying that night. Forensic tests showed that the dumbbells matched the dents on the suitcase, implying he had prepared tools for disposal beforehand. When asked why he chose to surrender after so many months, Xian said, "Every day I lived like I was dead. I couldn't sleep. I saw her face every time I closed my eyes." He claimed that his guilt and fear had consumed him until he could no longer bear it. After his confession, the Chinese police handed over copies of all evidence collected to the American authorities, maintaining transparency under the bilateral cooperation framework for transnational crimes. Both governments coordinated to ensure that justice could be served in China, since the suspect had fled there, and Chinese law forbids extraditing citizens at trial. The prosecution argued that Xian's actions were intentional homicide. Motivated by jealousy and possessiveness, they highlighted the fact that the victim was entirely defenseless, and the murder was followed by a series of deceitful acts designed to obstruct justice. They called for a severe sentence, stating that the defendant showed cruelty, lack of humanity, and attempted to escape responsibility for his actions. In his defense, Xian's lawyer pleaded for leniency, arguing that his client had confessed, cooperated with the investigation, and voluntarily surrendered, demonstrating remorse. He emphasized that the killing happened in a moment of emotional breakdown, not as a pre-planned act of revenge. Throughout the trial, Xian appeared pale and expressionless when the prosecutor read out the coroner's report detailing Xiaoying's injuries. He lowered his head and wept silently at the end of the proceedings. He said in his final statement, "I know no apology can bring her back. I destroyed her life and mine. I don't ask for forgiveness. I only hope that my death can give her family some peace." After careful deliberation, the court handed down its verdict. It ruled that while Xian's surrender and confession were mitigating factors, the nature of his crime was brutal and the impact severe. The Wanzhou City Intermediate People's Court sentenced Xian to death, with a 2-year reprieve, meaning the sentence could be commuted to life imprisonment if he demonstrated good behavior during that period. Upon hearing the verdict, Xian showed no visible reaction. His parents, sitting in the gallery, broke down in tears. Xiao Wang's family, who had flown from the United States to attend the trial, expressed deep sorrow, but said they were relieved to see justice served in the aftermath. The case ignited widespread discussions across China and the US about the challenges of international justice, the emotional struggles of overseas students, and the devastating consequences of unchecked possessiveness and rage. Professors at Xiaowang's University later established a small scholarship fund in her name to help female Chinese students studying abroad and to honor the bright life that was tragically cut short as police combed through the wreckage of the apartment. They began reconstructing the timeline of that dreadful morning. The neighbors reported smelling smoke around 7:40 a.m., but before that, several had heard faint cries and the sound of objects falling inside Lumen's apartment. No one suspected anything at first. They thought perhaps something had fallen while she was cooking, but within minutes, thick black smoke was pouring out from the window's fire. Investigators quickly determined that the fire had been started using accelerants, traces of gasoline, were found near the doorway and on the curtains. This indicated that the fire was deliberately set to destroy evidence. The forensic team also found that Lu Min's throat and lungs contained no soot, meaning she had already been dead before the fire began. Autopsy results confirmed the horrifying truth. Lu Min had been stabbed 3 times in the chest with a fruit knife before the blaze. There were clear signs of struggle on her arms and hands, suggesting she fought desperately for her life. Next step was to identify who could have done this, and why. Investigators learned that Lu Min lived alone in a small apartment she rented near the elementary school, where she taught. She was known as a kind, patient teacher, adored by her students and respected by her colleagues. However, detectives soon discovered that, in the weeks leading up to her death, she had been receiving harassing messages and phone calls from a man, her ex-boyfriend, Joe Peng, 29 years old, who worked as a delivery driver in Shanghai. According to her friends, Lu Min had ended their relationship several months earlier after Joe became increasingly controlling and paranoid. He would frequently show up unannounced outside her school or home, accusing her of seeing other men, despite repeated warnings, and even changing her phone number. He managed to contact her again and again the night before her death. Lu Min confided to a colleague through text, "He came again today. I told him to leave me alone, but he said I'll regret it if I keep rejecting him." Those were her final messages. When police searched the surrounding area for clues, surveillance footage from a nearby convenience store provided the breakthrough at 6:52 a.m., just over an hour before the fire. Cameras captured a man wearing a black hoodie and mask entering Lu Min's apartment building, carrying a plastic bag. Less than 30 minutes later, he was seen running out, no longer carrying the bag. Minutes after he left, the smoke began. Investigators immediately identified the man as Joe Peng. When police arrived at his registered address, he was gone, his motorcycle was missing, and his phone had been switched off. However, his family told police he had come home briefly around 8 a.m., soaking wet and trembling, before disappearing again for 2 days. Joe Peng was on the run. Police in Shanghai launched a citywide manhunt, and his photo appeared on every major news channel and social media platform. Finally, on the evening of March 22nd, Joe was found hiding under a bridge near the outskirts of the city. During interrogation, Joe initially denied involvement, claiming he was just visiting Lu Min that morning and left before anything happened. But after police presented surveillance footage, fingerprints from the fruit knife, and traces of gasoline found on his clothes, Joe broke down and confessed. He said he had gone to Lu Min's apartment to talk things out, but she refused to open the door after forcing his way in. They argued. Lu Min demanded he stop harassing her and threatened to call the police. Enraged, Joe grabbed a knife from the kitchen and stabbed her in the heat of the moment, realizing what he had done. He panicked and poured gasoline around the room, hoping the fire would make it look like an accident. In his statement, Joe said, "I didn't mean to kill her, I just wanted her to listen to me one last time, but she kept saying it was over. I lost my mind." The court did not accept his claim of momentary impulse. The prosecution emphasized that Joe had purchased gasoline the day before the crime, showing clear premeditation. Furthermore, he had deleted their text messages in an attempt to destroy evidence. In November 2020, the Shanghai Intermediate People's Court found Joe Peng guilty of intentional homicide and arson. He was sentenced to death, with deprivation of political rights for life. Upon hearing the verdict, Joe showed no visible emotion. Lu Min's parents, sitting in the courtroom, clutching a framed photo of their daughter, wept uncontrollably. The Lu Min case, as it came to be known, sent shockwaves throughout China. It reignited national debate on domestic violence, stalking, and women's safety, especially concerning obsessive ex-partners. And it was that very same night, filled with happiness and plans for the future, that tragedy began to take shape in silence. According to investigators, the day before the murder, Lu Min had gone to the hospital for a routine checkup, confirming she was 7 weeks pregnant. She was overjoyed that evening, During dinner with her parents, she mentioned she planned to surprise her husband Muji with the news that weekend. Her mother remembered her saying softly, "I think this child will change everything. Maybe he'll become more responsible now." But Lu Min could never have imagined that this piece of joyous news would become the fuse that ignited her destruction, the cracks beneath the surface. Although their marriage seemed peaceful to outsiders, subtle cracks had already begun forming. Friends later testified that Yan Muji was controlling, short-tempered, and insecure. He constantly checked Lu Min's phone, demanded to know her whereabouts, and accused her of hiding things if she didn't respond to his messages quickly enough. He would show up at her school gates, or even her workplace. At first, Lu Min tolerated it. She told colleagues, "He's just too dependent. Maybe he'll grow up once he starts working steadily." But as time went on, Muji's behavior worsened. He often played video games late into the night, refused to look for better work, and even borrowed money from Lu Min to pay off gambling debts. When she gently confronted him about their finances, Muji would explode. He would shout, throw things, and accuse her of looking down on him. Lu Min's mother later recalled her daughter confiding, "Sometimes I feel like I'm living with a stranger. He gets angry for no reason, and his eyes, they don't look normal." In truth, Muji had long been burdened by a deep inferiority complex to the outside world. He was the spoiled foreign returnee, but inside, he knew his life was built on lies. His wife's success, her steady job, her growing reputation as a beloved teacher, all of it made him feel small, useless, and humiliated. And then came the pregnancy, the ultimate blow to his fragile ego. The night before the murder, through phone records, investigators discovered that, at around 10:41 p.m. on March 19th, the couple had a long argument. Neighbors living downstairs reported hearing muffled voices, a man shouting, and what sounded like a chair being knocked over. At 11:15 p.m., Lu Min texted her mother one last time, "Mom, don't worry. We're just talking. I'll tell you good news tomorrow morning." That good news was her pregnancy announcement, a message that never came. The morning of the crime, CCTV footage from the hallway showed Muji leaving their apartment at 6:30 a.m. Wearing a black jacket and gloves. He was seen purchasing 2 bottles of gasoline at a nearby hardware store. Just 20 minutes later, he returned home. What happened next could only be pieced together through forensic reconstruction. Experts believe that after another argument broke out, Muji grabbed a kitchen knife and stabbed Lu Min multiple times, killing her instantly. Medical analysis showed that one stab wound went straight through her heart, fatal within seconds. After realizing what he had done, Muji sat in the living room for nearly half an hour, as shown by the timestamp on his home surveillance camera, which he had forgotten to unplug. He then poured gasoline around the bedroom and living area, lit a match, and fled the scene. At 7:38 a.m., smoke began pouring out of the windows. Neighbors raised the alarm, but by the time firefighters arrived, the entire apartment was engulfed in flames. The investigation and arrest. By 9 a.m., police had already identified Muji as the prime suspect, but when officers went to his workplace, he was gone. They later found him wandering aimlessly on a highway near more than 150 kilometers from Shanghai. When captured, Muji appeared disoriented but calm during interrogation. He admitted everything. "I didn't plan to kill her," he said quietly. "I just couldn't stand the thought that she was leaving me behind, that even the baby would love her more than me." The court, however, found ample evidence of premeditation, from the gasoline purchase to his attempt to destroy the crime scene. In October 2021, the Shanghai No. 1 Intermediate People's Court sentenced Yan Muji to death for intentional homicide and arson, with political rights revoked for life. When the verdict was read, Lu Min's mother broke down completely. Her husband, who had remained silent throughout the trial, finally spoke through tears. "She was our only child. She didn't even get to hold her baby." His life, but reality proved otherwise. Barely 2 months later, Muji relapsed. This time, he hid his gambling more cleverly. no longer at local parlors or betting apps under his own name, but through online proxies and friends' accounts. He convinced himself that with just one big win, he could repay his parents, make them proud, and finally prove his worth. Yet the more he tried to win, the deeper he fell when his adoptive father passed away from cancer. Muji didn't even attend the funeral properly. Neighbors recalled that he stood like a statue, eyes blank, leaving early before the cremation. His mother, already shattered by her husband's death, had no idea her son was sinking again, this time into a darkness from which he would never return. Illusion of success after losing his father. Muji seemed to change, at least on the surface. He reconnected with an old classmate, Lu Min, a gentle and ambitious woman who had become a primary school teacher. They met again at a reunion, and Muji's articulate, well-dressed manner gave the impression of a man who had matured. Told Lu Min that he had worked abroad in the auto industry and returned to China to start his own business. He presented himself as a self-made entrepreneur, masking his failures and debts behind fake confidence. Lu Min, raised in a kind and trusting family, admired his supposed resilience. Their relationship progressed quickly. Within months, they were married in a modest ceremony, the Lu family believing their daughter had found a hard-working, educated partner with international experience. They had no idea that behind the suit and polite smile was a man whose world had long collapsed, quiet descent into ruin after marriage. Muji's facade began to crack again, his gambling addiction worsened, and now, with access to his wife's savings, he had a new source of money. He convinced Lu Min to lend him funds under the pretext of business investments. She trusted him fully, transferring thousands of yuan at a time, but when repayments never came and excuses piled up, Lu Min began to suspect something was wrong. Quietly, she checked his phone one night, and what she found left her trembling. Messages from loan sharks, screenshots of betting sites, debt reminders, with threats. When she confronted him the next morning, Muji's mask shattered completely. He screamed that she had no right to invade his privacy, threw his phone across the room, and stormed out that night. He didn't come home from that point onward. Their relationship deteriorated rapidly. He would vanish for days, sometimes weeks, returning with hollow promises and desperate apologies each time. Lu Min's heart softened. She believed he could still change her parents, however, began to worry deeply. They urged her to separate from him, but she refused, saying, "He's lost his way, but I can't abandon him. I promised to be by his side." The breaking point. By early 2021, Muji was drowning in debt again. The loan sharks were no longer patient. They sent threats, even following him to his apartment. Desperate and cornered, he turned once again to Lu Min, begging her to help him just one last time. But this time, she refused. She had discovered she was pregnant, and her priorities shifted completely. She told him calmly that she would keep the child, with or without him, but she could no longer enable his lies. Those words were the spark that ignited Muji's rage to him. The pregnancy symbolized something unbearable, that his wife was moving forward, building a future that no longer needed him. His fragile ego, already crushed by failure and deceit, couldn't accept that the woman he once controlled now had a purpose that excluded him from that moment. Something in Muji's mind snapped. He began acting strangely, quiet one moment, furious the next. He stopped sleeping, stopped eating, and even bought a knife under the pretense of fixing things around the house. His colleagues, who thought he was still employed at the auto parts plant, noticed he had become withdrawn and irritable. None of them knew that he hadn't worked there in months. Fire to the bedsheets, then poured alcohol and accelerant on the mattress, curtains, and around the body. A desperate attempt to erase his crime. Within minutes, flames engulfed the room, spreading through the wooden furniture and curtains. The suffocating smoke poured out the windows, catching the attention of neighbors, who immediately called the fire department. As the fire raged, Muji fled the scene in a panic. Witnesses later told police they saw a man sprinting out of the house, his face pale and hands trembling. before speeding away in a black sedan. The neighbors initially assumed he was just a terrified family member rushing for help. None could have imagined he was the killer himself. Firefighters arrived swiftly, battling the flames for over an hour. When the fire was finally contained, the sight that awaited them inside was harrowing. The second-floor bedroom was completely charred. Furniture reduced to ash. Amid the blackened debris lay the lifeless, burnt remains of a woman later identified as Lu Min, only 26 years old, a beloved teacher, wife, and soon-to-be mother at first. Investigators suspected a domestic accident, perhaps a gas leak or electrical fault. But when they examined the scene more closely, they found anomalies. The fire's origin was traced not to a stove or socket, but to the bed itself. The burn patterns suggested the use of accelerants, and most shockingly, near the victim's remains, they discovered a fruit knife, partially melted but still bearing traces of blood and tissue. The cause of death was soon confirmed: multiple stab wounds to the neck and chest. Lu Min had been murdered before the fire was set. The investigation as police pieced together the puzzle. Suspicion quickly turned toward Muji. Neighbors reported his frequent visits to the house, and his visible distress outside the burning building earlier that morning. Surveillance footage from nearby streets captured his car leaving the neighborhood moments before the blaze erupted. When police tracked down Muji later that night, he was found hiding in a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city, his hands still bearing small burns. He was arrested on the spot during interrogation. At first, Muji denied everything. He claimed he had left home before the fire started, and that the last time he saw his wife, she was fine. But when investigators presented the forensic evidence, traces of his fingerprints on the lighter, DNA on the knife, and accelerant residue on his clothes, his story crumbled under mounting pressure. Muji finally confessed. He broke down, sobbing, claiming that he didn't mean to kill her, that it was an accident. In the heat of the moment, he said he only wanted money to pay off debts, and that his wife's refusal drove him into madness. "I just wanted her to help me one last time," he cried, "but she said I was hopeless. I didn't know what I was doing." Yet his so-called remorse couldn't erase the brutality of his act, nor the devastating loss he inflicted. The truth about Muji's past during the trial. More chilling details emerged about Muji's background. The court discovered he had not only lied to his wife about his education and finances, but had also borrowed money from her colleagues, using her name. His online gambling history revealed hundreds of transactions in the months leading up to the murder. Proof that he had continued betting heavily, despite his promises to change sex. Evaluation concluded that Muji had an addictive and narcissistic personality, prone to manipulation and emotional instability. He was unable to handle rejection or failure, and when faced with losing control, he resorted to violence. Even his adoptive parents were stunned by the revelations of the father, frail from illness, reportedly told police. "We raised him with everything we had. We never imagined our love would create this tragedy." Lu Min's parents, on the other hand, were inconsolable. Their daughter, once the pride of the family, a dedicated teacher loved by her students, had been taken in the most horrific way by the very man they had trusted, nurtured with patience and warmth. The children, too young to understand the meaning of death, kept asking their parents when Teacher Lu would come back. Some drew pictures of her on the classroom blackboard. Others left little notes saying, "Teacher Lu, we miss you." Those innocent gestures were both heartbreaking and beautiful, silent tributes to the woman who had dedicated her life to guiding them at her former school. A memorial corner was set up in the staff lounge. On the table lay a framed photo of Lu Min, smiling softly, her hair tied neatly as always, eyes kind and bright. Surrounding it were fresh white lilies and handwritten letters from colleagues and students. Every teacher who passed by stopped for a few moments, some whispering prayers, others unable to hold back tears. The once lively teacher's desk now stood empty, her chair pushed slightly back, as if she might return any moment to resume her lessons. The tragedy spread across Chinese media like wildfire on social networks. Countless posts condemned the brutality of the act and expressed sympathy for the young teacher who had lost her life so senselessly. Many netizens voiced outrage at Muji's coldness, calling him a wolf in human skin, a man who had destroyed not only his wife, an unborn child, but also the peace of two entire families. Others used the case to highlight the dangers of hidden addictions, particularly gambling, which had once again proven capable of reducing a man to moral ruin. When the verdict was finally carried out, there was no drama, only quiet finality. Reports said that in the days leading up to his execution, Muji remained calm, emotionless, eating his meals and sleeping normally. He refused to see his adoptive parents for the final visit, reportedly telling the prison warden, "There's nothing left to say." The day before the execution, his adoptive father, weakened by illness, sent a short letter through the detention center. It read, "Even if you were not born to us, you were still our son. We did everything we could. I hope you understand now what your mother and I gave up for you. Rest in peace. And may Lu Min forgive you." In another world, the next morning, at dawn, Muji was executed by lethal injection at the Shanghai detention center. Witnesses described the atmosphere as somber. He reportedly uttered no final words, only closed his eyes, expressionless, as if surrendering to the inevitably. Min's parents, upon receiving confirmation of the execution, did not celebrate her mother, simply placed her daughter's framed photo by the window, lit a small incense stick, and whispered through tears, "My child, the man who took you away has gone, but even so, your mother still cannot find peace. You were so kind, so gentle. Why did the heavens not protect you?" The story of Lu Min and Yan Muji became one of the most haunting domestic murder cases in Shanghai's recent history, a cautionary tale of how love built on deception can turn into tragedy, and how one man's greed and addiction destroyed countless lives.